Pandora's box is about to open wide.
Fine Tash content. What we're bringing to you here is fine Tash content.
Oh yeah, brother.
Welcome to another Pandora's box, ladies and gentlemen. We were just talking about how Drew shaved his beard off, or at least most of it, but he's kept a bit of a tash. Yeah. And you know what I'm liking about it, Drew?
What's that?
I'm going to treat this PB, even though it's going out, obviously, several days after VE Day. We're going to treat this as like our little VE Day Pandora's Box special.
I'm loving the get-up,
And
man.
do you know what you look a little bit like now that you've shaved your beard off but you've got a moustache? You look like you should be World War II RAF pilot, Drew.
Yeah.
And Bullwinkle does too.
That's kind of what...
Because he's obviously... Look at you both.
That's the stash,
Look
bros.
at you both. You both look like British RAF, World War II era.
You should have seen it when I first shaved my beard off as well, because it was like way lower than like it's grown back in about 4 days now.
Right.
So that's about 4 days worth of.
Is that you bragging, Drew? You're like, yeah, I can grow it back a bit.
Showing off.
I mean, it's hard being this much of a man, but someone's got to do it, you know.
When you got a tash like this, you got to flaunt it.
Yeah, man. I'm gonna, because I feel like it's more
man.
World War II-y.
That's it. Get those curls on the go.
Yeah.
There you go. Look at that.
That's it.
That's a World War II tash, that, isn't it?
Do you remember that? Do you remember that picture that I had of like a full clean shave, but like a massive tash with curls?
That was good.
That was well. Oh, mate, that was funny. Oh no.
Wasn't that just one of those ones that like you did it though?
For
like,
fuck's sake.
What? What the hell? No, we just suddenly heard Drew just like. By the way, apologies for those expletives. Drew just randomly just like threw out some obscenities and has just left the show. He just left the show.
Rage quit.
Drew just raged quit the show, ladies and gentlemen. Why he got so angry? I mean, we can only guess. We do like a mystery here on Pandora's Box. That is today's mystery.
I wonder if he's still there. We'll hear from him in 2
hours.
hours.
Oh my god,
like,
mate!
I'm still here.
Can you imagine? That would be so funny. For people that don't know what we're on about, or maybe you didn't catch the episode that went out a fortnight ago, Drew just randomly left the show. We assumed for some technical difficulties, but apparently Drew was there, like his end, and we just realised that we just thought he was like gone and he couldn't like reconnect for some reason. Maybe he had like some internet issues or something. And then it turned out later on, he like came in for the last 5 minutes of the show that he'd been there the whole time and he just thought we were ignoring it. Which was so funny, but I wonder if I hope he can come back in, because otherwise I don't really know what to tell you. Don't really know what to tell you. I'm going to assume that he's going to come back in a minute. What was really funny for us, from our point of view as well, I assumed that he thought he was already gone. When he was like, for F's sake. But he was like still there for that bit, which makes it even funnier. That it just sounded like, he just rage quit. He rage quit the show.
I reckon his PC must have crashed or something, man.
I did think it was quite funny. It like froze on his face and he was like this.
Yeah.
So that was quite funny. It's always good when something like that happens, isn't it? But yeah, welcome to Pandora's Box, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us on the show today. As I said, we're going to treat this as like the
home of the stash.
This is not only the home of the stash, but yeah, this is going to be our VE Day special. So we're going to be talking a lot about World War II today. I think World War II is absolutely fascinating. I think arguably, if you want to know why the world is the way it is today, the best way to realize that, to get the information for that, is to learn about World War II, because it completely shaped the way that the world is today, whether it's in terms of the United Nations, the way that certain countries are in terms of like borders, relationships with other countries, like massively so. It really shaped the way that the world is today. Especially with certain. He's back, ladies and gentlemen. No, that's all right, man. That was really funny, because I assume you didn't realise that you were like still on there, but all of a sudden, from our point of view, you just went, "Oh, for F's sake!" and then you just like left the show. So that was like really comical. We were saying it was like you rage quit the show, Drew. You suddenly went, "Oh, for F's sake!" and then you just like just went. It was like, "Oh right,"
disappeared.
Oh right, okay.
Am I in twice?
No,
we only see you once, man.
No, that's right, man.
I'm in
You're
twice.
tripping, man.
Mine.
You're tripping.
Absolutely.
He's tripping balls. What? You can see yourself twice, like in two different things? That's a bit weird, isn't it? Yeah, no, literally on here, man. It's just 2 screens split down the middle. We're on the right, you're on the left. That's how it is from my perspective, anyway.
2 seconds, I'm gonna have to come back in.
Mustaches than mine.
Oh, he's leaving again.
Oh, he's going again.
Oh, for F's sake. Yeah, I mean that's just genetics, Bullwinkle, isn't it? That's just genetics, my friend. You're a lot fairer than Drew. It's to be expected. Yeah. You know, Drew's got brown eyes and like auburn hair, and you've got like more like blondie hair, haven't you? And you've got like light coloured eyes. Do
you reckon I'll go grey? Like silver? I reckon I probably will.
Not anytime soon.
No, hopefully not.
Well, I think the lighter your hair is, the more likely it is that it'll go silver, isn't it? Lighter haired people tend to... I tell you what I think is quite interesting is my grandma Enid was like proper redhead when she was younger. And rather than her going like grey or silver, her hair's almost gone like what looks almost a bit like bleach blonde.
Interesting.
Which I think is quite interesting.
That is interesting.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a good side effect, I think, of being a redhead. I'm not saying that happens to all redheads, but...
You won't be happy with me for this, but I reckon Josh will go grey.
Why wouldn't I be happy with you about that?
No, not you. Him.
Oh! I was like, why would I be angry about that?
I can imagine him listening right now going, cheers.
I mean, we're all going to go grey, man, eventually.
Very true. Very true. Some people don't, though. Isn't that true?
I guess. Well, I don't know.
I want an Alex Skolnick grey.
Yeah. Good point.
You want an Alex Skolnick grey?
Yeah, you know that. I mean, just the stripe.
Man, me and Josh... Yeah. Me and Josh are already going a bit grey, to be honest. We talk about it sometimes. We talk about our mortality and how we're basically getting old and wrinkly and grey. And
it happens, man. It happens to all of us.
I don't think you can tell quite as much since you could tell more when I had like really long hair. But I do have grey hairs in my beard. I said you can't really tell so much on camera. Maybe you can see the odd little bit.
I can see a few.
I think there's a bit of white or a bit of grey there. Yeah. And I do have some... You can see. I actually think, if anything, you can notice it more on like the shorter bits here. If like the light catches it right, you see like a bit where it's a bit lighter. I think where the light's catching it more. Yeah, there's a couple of silver speckles.
Grey hair can actually look pretty cool. I think of like Jose Mourinho and people like that.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, I'd rather just like embrace, say, going grey or silver than be one of those guys that's like got an obviously quite bad dyed hair when you're like in like your 70s and your 80s.
Like Vince McMahon now.
Yeah, it's like mate. And what's even weirder about that is Vincent Kennedy McMahon. He was grey for about 20 years, and then started
grey by choice,
and then started deciding to dye his hair.
That's mental.
But he looked absolutely fine with grey hair,
and he looked mental with black hair.
He looked like a evil, dastardly comic book character.
He looked like the little like puppet out of Goosebumps.
Yeah, mixed with Dick Dastardly from Wacky Races. Like a bit like that. So yeah, it's a bit of a... I'd rather just go grey than just rock the grey hair. You know?
I think my mum's gone grey quite gracefully. Like she's like proper just like silver as a base, but she still gets like streaks of just loads of different colours through, like pink and like purple and like all these different. But like it's not like just dyeing your whole hair. She's kind of done it through, so it's the grey's like there as well. Yeah, she's just making it a bit more colourful.
Yeah, just because she likes the colours and all that. Yeah, no, I think that's cool. And she's still got really nice hair. You know, it's like very bountiful hair. I would just say bountiful hair.
I think it's mad as well. Guthrie Govan, the amazing guitarist, like insane fusion guitarist. He's got like...
Is he from a band or is he more just solo career?
Solo career. He's got a band called The Aristocrats, which are like a 3-piece of just like virtuoso musicians, like the drummer, the bassist, and the guitarist are all known as being like super like high virtuoso like musicians normally for other bands that they like sit in at, but then they kind of got together and did a like, but and he's also the guitarist for Hans Zimmer as well.
Oh wow,
yeah,
the famous like music the film score composer.
Yeah, and he all of a sudden I didn't watch his videos for a couple of years, and he's gone from like he has like insanely curly like massive hair, and it just all of a sudden has gone white, you know. But over a couple of years of just not watching it, it's like, oh, Guthrie Govan's just completely still got the same crazy massive big curly hair, but like it's just completely grey now.
Oh, that's cool, man. Yeah, that's cool. Oh, is this a dog?
Oh yeah,
or is it a baby?
It's just Rupert.
Oh, that's cool. No, it was just quite ominous. I was like, is that a ghost or what? But yeah, no, I've heard you talk about Guthrie Govan a lot in the past, but I don't really know much about him. Do you know what I mean? Oh, look, he's the ominous dog.
Yeah, just watching. He's such a good guitarist, man. Like insane. He's got like a signature like Charvel guitar, but like the newer just looks like a Strat. But he's got like a roasted maple neck on it, and it just looks insane. Like it plays really nice. But yeah,
cool,
he's a great guitarist.
Yeah. I always think it's like in a similar vein to say the Going Grey thing as well. I always think like, you know, if your hair starts going like too bold, like if you start going too bold, like don't like fight it. I think just start just shaving your head. Do you know what I mean? Just shave it.
I think I'd rather go grey than go bald.
I agree.
I think I'd look weird bald.
I think the problem is though, Bullwinkle, you don't have a choice, do you? That's the thing, man. That's the thing, my friend.
No.
Yeah? Some people start going grey and then they go bald.
I reckon I'll be alright.
It's probably impossible to happen the other way around, isn't it?
Yeah. I reckon I'll be alright. I reckon my hair will last.
Your hair's quite
a
thick,
while.
isn't it?
I've got quite a good hairline. It's like quite thick. It's almost like my mum's hair as opposed to like my dad's hair.
Yeah. I think you'll definitely be fine as well, Drew. Your hair's too thick. Even if you lost half your hair.
I don't think I'm going back at all yet or anything.
Nah. Even if you lost half your hair would still be thicker than mine, man. Like, do you know what I mean?
It's crazy people that like would literally be bald by my age.
Oh yeah, I'm glad that.
Like,
I'm
that's
glad
a
that
bit mental.
It happened to a lot of people in our year actually and stuff. You see him nowadays, and
quite a few. Yeah.
Okay.
Like my friend Max Karakides, he was going bold pretty much. Like, he started going bold like around the time we left school. He went to Chiltern, but like,
that's crazy.
Like, when I first like sort of got to know him, like because when I first met him, he had like long curly hair, like ringlety hair, but he started shaving it because he started getting like not only was it fully receding here, but he actually had like a bald patch here as well. Jesus! So we were like 16. That's mad, isn't it?
Yeah. What causes that?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
That's mental.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things, isn't it? But, like, I always think, at the end of the day, I try and use someone like Triple H, the wrestler, as a template. And obviously, he had long hair when he was younger. And, like, similar to me, like, do you know what I mean? It was, like, long, straight hair. And then, you know, as he got a bit older, he just, like, shaved his head. And now he just sort of, like, it's not like he bics it, but it's always just almost creeps at a grade 0.
Yeah.
And because he's got that big beard, I don't know, I think it looks quite cool. I think it's a bit weird when people are like completely bald on like the head and the face because they just look a bit like an egg. But I think if you could have like a big beard and you just got it look, I think you need a beard.
To pull off
it's mad how your beard doesn't generally. I don't think anyone that isn't even a thing, is it? Like losing your beard, like your beard going bald. No. It's not even like a. Yeah,
I know what you mean though. Like
you know what you mean. Your hair, you get like a bald patch in that. Like imagine if just like you've got a patch here or something.
Patch like just a little hole here.
Yeah, it just started on your chin. It's like the top of your head. It just started getting like bald there.
It is quite weird though, isn't it? Like, isn't it strange that like like men only really lose hair on their head? Like we've got a body. Like in general, the older you get as a man, the hairier you'll get, and I can definitely attest to that. I'm still getting hairier. Like every couple of years, I'll notice like I'm getting hairier.
I'm still waiting for chest hair. Got a little bit, tiny bit.
I'm like I'm like a rug dude.
Yeah,
it's sort of creeping out. I'm like Austin Powers, you know. It's like creeping out the top of my frilly cravat.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, isn't it funny that like what is it about your hormones and about aging that you'll get hairier on your body, you'll continue to get hairier, and yeah, as you said, you'll never like lose
texture.
your beard hair, but you could lose your hair. Like, what's so specific about this region? You know, about the cranium portion of your head.
And I think, to be honest, that with like how fast technology moves, I think by the time any of us were at the point that we just have to fully go bald, like hair transplants would just be so available and good.
I'm cutting it pretty fine, man. I'm cutting it pretty fine.
I reckon you still got a while in you, man.
I've got about 3 or 4 years.
Do you think, say someone who's had one of those transplants, like, do you think like it looks a bit weird? Like, so, you know, like Theo Von, he's had like a full hair transplant.
Has he?
Yeah.
Do you know what? In a way, I'm glad that you said that, because I know. Don't get me wrong. I think he does look great for his age in general. I think he's one of those guys that just looks very youthful. Like, do you know what I mean? He wasn't like a Mia or a Josh when we were younger. He was more like a you or a Nicky C. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can imagine he wasn't the mate. Let's face it, he wasn't the mate that you'd ask to buy booze when you're still a teenager. Do you know what I mean? Like when you're like still in school, but because he's in his 40s, isn't he? And I always think, man, it's crazy. He's like 10 years older than me, but his hair is so much thicker, and it's like all the way down
tell,
to here.
Like when when I found out about it, I was like, because he said it on a podcast or something, and I was like, whoa!
Oh, did he?
I was like,
because Theo's honest, and he wouldn't lie.
Because I know he's been rocking a mullet for ages, but the mullet was just getting bigger and thicker every time I saw him, videos and stuff. And it was like. And then he said that, and I was like, "Oh, that makes sense." Like he got some kind of transplant in the top or something.
They are really good now, the transplants. Have you ever seen?
It's one of those things that people go to Turkey for, isn't it? It's like people go to Turkey for teeth. They go to Turkey for hair transplants. That's like the two things.
Have you ever seen the flights of people that go there and the flight back? Because when they get it,
everyone there's just bold.
Literally, they all wear like a headband. You have to wear like a headband around your head, and because it makes your head swell, they look a little bit like Megamind. Like you just sort of have this black, just like a big head.
Oh, okay.
Like it's a movie about a smart guy with a big head.
Right.
But so they've got this like black headband around their head. You could probably search it up and see it, man.
Right.
And their head will just be like swollen, a bit like an egg, like over the top. Right. And there'll just be flights of people back where just everyone has
quite a comical thought in my head. Just the idea that there's just like this EasyJet flight to Turkey, and every bloke there is just like bold and looks a bit sad. And on the way back, just everyone's got like the thickest, lushest head of hair, but like this weirdly swollen face still. But everyone's like.
It reminds me as well. Like my dad was telling me, like when he came and visited us in Ludlow, it was like probably like a year ago now, like 6 months or something. But my dad just got this operation on his eyes, and you can go in, and it's like it's not through the NHS. It's like it's got to be a private one because it's not seen as like mandatory that you do it. But it's not cataracts. It's something like that where you got to get like laser. Some kind of laser surgery in your eyes, and he went there, and he went on a train because you couldn't drive, and like Cammy was doing something, so he was just like, I'll just get a train back after and stuff. But it's like a really similar thing. Like his vision just wasn't there. Like when he had this procedure done, and he thought they said you'll still be able to see a little bit in that, but he was pretty much completely blind.
He's like leaving.
He had like these weird glasses on, and these this like mark on his head, these two X's on his head that they put to do with the surgery or something. And like he said, he was just walking around and trying to get on the train and that, just thinking, what the hell am I doing? Couldn't even see his phone, like pretty much blind. And this guy spotted him and just walked up to him and was like, "You all right, mate? Like, do you want to help? Do you want to help with the train? Don't worry, I was you about 6 months ago."
Mate, I love how like everyone else would have just thought he was a nut bar unless you'd had it done yourself. But then you suddenly be like, "Mate, I know what's
that guy," and that's it. And apparently they get people at that train station all the time, like turning up like that with like these glasses on and just some X's on your head where you've just gone through the eye surgery down the road. And it reminded me of that with like what you said about the EasyJet flight. Like they must have like a train line that's like that there.
Oh god, Bullwinkle's just showing me a picture of it. That looks horrible. He looks like a mushroom.
It's like that's sort of like effects that they get.
He looks like a mushroom.
Like a swollen head.
How much to lick his head? Lick the weird bubbly bit.
It's great. It looks a bit like a tattoo as well. Because obviously they're like putting, I don't really know how it works, but they're like putting pins in the head basically. So it just looks like they've tattooed your head to have like a bit of hair.
I feel like if you did pop it with a pin there, it would just pop.
Oh yeah, and be all pussy and weird.
Imagine it just.
Yeah,
it's just like all like flesh and pus everywhere.
But I do reckon that it's gonna like because they're already really good quality. Like you see some of them, you wouldn't even know.
Well, Theo's is pretty good.
Like a hair transplant. Exactly, Theo Von's a great example.
I don't. Do you know what? I mean, I'm not saying I wouldn't do it. I don't know if I would want one.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'd
consider if I was going bold. I think and it was like affordable and. Like,
I think the thing is the reason the thing that would, I think, be tempting for me is because I really like having long hair, and also I've had long hair for quite a percentage of my life. And it's almost like the finality, the totality of the idea that, say, I'll never have long hair again at this point, because almost like it's not really worth it, because by the time it would take me probably like 3 or 4 years to grow it, as long as it was the last time I cut it. And the idea that, like, by that point it would just be so thin and so just rubbish, essentially, that it would just almost be a bit of a letdown compared to how it was when I was younger. That feels quite sad to me. Do you know what I mean? So I think that could entice me maybe to consider it. But at the same time, I think there's also a part of me that's like respecting the stages of your life. Yeah. And like, you know, when I was a teenager and when I was in my 20s and all that. Yeah, like I had this like long, like flowing, head of hair, and like none of it was grey and all the rest of it. But it's just a different state. You're at a different stage of your life now.
I'd be worried that I'd have like a real bumpy head, or like a bit. I can feel bumps on my head, and I don't know why. I think I've said this on the pod before. I don't know why
just where
that
you bumped
is.
your head, isn't it?
Probably, but
Because
probably not a good sign.
I've got like a bit of a bump on the back of my
The
head
shape
here,
of
but
your
I know
head.
it's just where I've like banged my head a couple of times. Because it's like the part of your head you tend to bang that bit.
Mm.
You know when you see people with like excess skin on their heads, and they almost look a bit like a pug.
Yeah, like a bulldog. Yeah, I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah.
Like
I wouldn't want that.
when you see like quite like bit like you think of it like a stereotypical like British
Yeah.
build, don't you? Like on the back here,
The
it's just
rolls.
almost like ridges.
Yeah.
And they just look a bit like
Like my
little
belly
bald
rolls
man,
bottom
innit?
your neck.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. That's it. Yeah, back of the neck
It's not
rolls.
the ideal look, I don't think.
It's weird the idea of just going like that and feeling them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Getting your hand trapped in there.
Squidging them.
Yeah, stick your finger in there and
Yeah.
just tickle it. I like how this is our VE Day special. We're
Yeah,
just
this is
talking
all about World War II.
We're just talking about neck fat. Neck fat on the back
I
of
wonder
people's
what
heads.
Churchill's neck fat was like.
I'd have tickled it, definitely.
Yeah,
I'd have
me
asked
too.
him, though, very politely if I could, because he was, our Prime
Over
Minister.
a whiskey.
And, yeah, definitely. Just over a whiskey with him and like, hello, Calum, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, so
Check on a minute.
can I tickle your neck fat? What a weird thing to ask.
How are you
I
roll?
like the idea that that's the first thing you ask him. Let's get this out of the way first and foremost.
Let's get rid of the elephant in the room.
You know what I'm thinking. I know what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Let me touch it.
Yeah. Right, guys. World War II.
Yeah.
World War II. I was saying when you rage quit the show, Drew, I was saying that I think that there is nothing that can teach you more about the way the world is today than World War II. If you want to understand why the world is how it is today, research World War II, both in terms not of just like, geographical borders, like, like borders of countries, but also like relations between different countries. United Nations, say like why America's relationship with Japan is the way it is, why Japan in itself is the way it is, obviously why Germany is the way it is, all these different countries, I could just go on and on. This is quite a broad question, so don't feel like it's, feel free to say absolutely whatever you want, because I understand it's to an extent putting you on the spot, but the whole point is it's not a specific question. What are your both individual thoughts on the Second World War, if you have any? And if you don't have any, just say I don't have any. And we'll just talk about the war anyway.
The main thing for me is like the how horrific it seemed, the stuff that happened in the concentration camps and to like the Jews as a people.
Holocaust.
Yeah, the Holocaust. Yeah. Like and I know people that have been to the gas chambers. Where is it in the world?
Auschwitz.
In Auschwitz, yeah. And just
there's also Bergen-Belsen.
Yeah, and how weird the vibe is there of just like how many people died there, and it was like I just can't believe something like that like happened in the world.
It's the fact that it was the systematic coldness of it which seems very strange and clinical. Like the idea that you're going to put these people on these trains that just get sent there, and then you're basically going to be put in two. It's not even two camps really. It's just that. You're basically going to make some of them do hard labour. Every day, apparently, the way it would almost like you'd like line up, and then like a Nazi guard would come up and he basically, point at you and you need to go left, or point at you and go right. If you were going right, you'd be doing like back-breaking labour all day. If you go in left, you were sent to the chambers. Yeah, and every day you just didn't know. It was like Russian roulette. It was
something like that happened, and also like in times of war and when such craziness is going on like that, how like brutality is like so normalized and things like that are normalized, and how in human nature like we can normalize some really really horrible stuff if it's culturally accepted. Like the German people and how you see like how some officers are portrayed in films and that, and just like in Schindler's List when the guy's just standing at the top of the thing and he's at a concentration camp and he's just like sniping out people from his bedroom, and stuff, and it's like you can imagine stuff like that happening, and people are just looking at it like, oh yeah, just another day in like this in this world that we live in, and it's like, no, that is insane. Like
yes, yeah. I think you're right, completely right, Drew. So that, I think like the moral of the story is you need to be we need to be very careful what we're doing in modern time, and we can use history as a way to almost like check yourself. So look at what's happening in, say, your modern politics. Look at what's happening in a modern global arena, and look back through history and think, are there like similarities between that, and use it as almost like warnings? You know, 'cause you can learn from history. I think for me personally, nothing has taught me more in terms of almost like how to in terms of like form my opinions and my outlook on the world than like researching history. And as I said, you know what I mean, it's like I think that's personally the best way, you know, because it's basically it's almost like it's like the meta analysis of the world. Do you know what I mean? It's like you can just see, okay, what happened in this country, say, when communism was you know, widespread, and then what happened after, say, 2 decades of communism in this country? What happened when this ideology was allowed to take the forefront and was voted into power? And then what happened as a consequence of that? You know, all these different things. You know, so you can see that, and then when you start seeing, say, parties like this rising in, say, your own country, you can be like, ooh, this is quite a lot like what happened there, and we all know how that ended up. So that is why I'm opposed to that. You know,
there's a privilege, isn't there, that we're the generation that gets to use these examples and put them into practice. You know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And the fact that we have actual real life historical events that we can look at and say, we don't want that to happen again. We're not going to do these same things again. We're not going to look past this stuff. It sort of allows us to almost be a generation that hopefully things like this can't happen to the extent, or hopefully one day can happen again.
I mean, you'd like to think so, wouldn't you? I mean, obviously the caveat to that is, I mean, you know, it's not like people say at the beginning of World War I, even, let alone World War II, didn't have a complete history of war. Do you know what I mean? Because I mean, there's been like ridiculous amounts of war since time immemorial. You know what I mean? You had like you had the Napoleonic War, obviously, which was a massive war. But in between the Napoleonic War and the First World War, you had the Crimean War, you had the Boer War, you had quite a lot of, you know, you had big conflicts. I guess one thing is it would have been harder to learn about them in those days, because you would have had to have taken the initiative to read books about them and have teachers or people that knew a lot about it and then learn from it. Whereas now, obviously, we have loads of documentaries and stuff at our disposal that way you can learn about it in a much easier way. But yeah, no, I think the thing that frustrates me sometimes is when if you do see some people that are, say, pushing for an ideology that they, in their mind, have convinced themselves would be better than whatever, say, the method of running our country is at the moment or whatever. But they haven't even taken the time to see what's happened to countries that have implemented those, like, you know, that way of life in the past. But they're still adamant that is what would be best, and it's like that frustrates me, you know, because I'm like, well, you can just see from, say, this country, blah blah blah, and what happened here, that's like just leads to, you know, like poverty, you know, economy crashes, misery. It's like, I always think of that meme. I've shared it on Pandora's Box Instagram several times, and it's like, you know, there's this like weird thing and in the West, and there's like a certain amount of youngsters in the West that almost like seem to be quite fond of the idea of communism. And I've shared it in the past, like on the Pandora's Box Instagram, and it's like Western teenagers that grew up in a capitalist society praising communism, and then it's like, meanwhile, any Eastern European, and then it's a picture from Game of Thrones, and it's like Arya Stark, and she's just in the crowd, and she's like all muddy and like stuff, and she's just like looking like really angry. Yeah, but it's true. It's like, do you know what I mean? It's not even like it's like this great mystery. I mean, you ask people like Ruta. Oh, I want to just give Ruta a shout out, actually, because Ruta, who obviously is our presenter on AW Radio, she has the wellness hour, the wellness show, and yeah, she's like a great champion lifter, stuff like that. Anyway, she won. Long story short, she won the European Championships. Woo! So shout out to Ruta. She also, I think she got, I think she even managed to get a world record as well, like when she won a gold. Nice. So yeah, shout out to Ruta. Fair play. That is, yeah, what an inspiration. But you know, you ask someone like Ruta, who's Lithuanian, so she grew up. She's in her late 40s, so she grew up under the Iron Curtain. You know, Lithuania used to be part of the Soviet Union. You know, not by choice; it was just the way it was. You know, it was the right of might. You know, so Poland, Lithuania, lots of other countries that were under the Soviet Union. You ask someone like Ruta what it was like. I mean, we actually did an episode with Ruta about 2 years ago now, maybe longer. So you can actually find that if you go back far enough, say on our Pandora's Box, YouTube, or Spotify. But I remember we touched on the show what it was like growing up in Lithuania under the Soviet Union, and she said you just never. She said you never even saw like a fat. She never even saw like a fat person until she moved to like the West, because nobody would have enough food to get fat. You know, she said she'd never seen a banana until she first came to the UK, because you wouldn't have anything like that on the shelves. You know, the economy was so bad. Everyone was living in poverty. Everything was great. That everywhere you went, there was no like art or wealth or nice cars or anything. Everything was just poverty, strife, awful.
Yeah,
you know?
it's like people think that it's going to be like what we have now, but you won't have to pay for anything.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
It's almost like quite childish, isn't it? Yeah, it's almost like, okay, so like on paper, in a very naive sense, it sort of sounds good, like, oh, okay, so everyone will get treated 100% equally regardless of what you do, and everyone will get paid the same regardless of what you do. But that takes all incentive away in life. So the idea that like you get paid the same if you were like a paper boy as if you were like a brain surgeon, or like, you know, somebody that was at the forefront of like cancer technology compared to somebody that works in like a spa. You know, and that's the thing. It's not putting down being a paper boy or working in a spa. Every job is crucial. Every job has its role. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think anyone should ever be elitist about a job that anyone does. But let's face it, there needs to be incentive in life. There needs to be rewards for doing things that are pushing our society forward. That's why obviously it's really good to have things like R&D tax credits. And if you have a company which you think that you could have an R&D tax credit, then get in contact with Aspen Waite today, and we will sort you out with an R&D tax credit, which will get you money to reward you for your innovation. Nice camera work, Bullwinkle. Nice camera work. But yeah, no, seriously, Aspen Waite. So obviously we're AW Radio, part of an umbrella group. Our umbrella group, our larger company is Aspen Waite, and Aspen Waite does research and development tax credits. So yeah, no, seriously, if you do, have a business, or you think in any way that you could be, you could qualify to get an R&D tax credit.
If you do anything that's innovative or new.
Then get in contact. We will sort you out. Basically, we get you like as much money as we possibly can, and we take a small percentage of that for doing all of the work for you. You don't even have to do anything essentially, apart from just give us some information. Boom.
You were saying earlier about how, like, what's the instant thing that comes to our mind, and another thing that I wanted to sort of touch on was just how far we've come since World War II in terms of technology and the way the world is today. Like even watching like the way the war was fought, it's not a way that war would be fought today.
No, but sorry, just before you go on, I would say though that one of the things that's fascinating about World War II is how in a very, very short amount of time technology went leaps and bounds forward, and it's in times like that you're almost like forced to. It's almost like the world did what would usually be 30 years of technological growth in like 5 years, you know, or even less. And I say, don't worry, I'll let you get back to your point, Bullwinkle. But one thing I always thought was really, really fascinating, say with the Battle of Britain, which started in 1940. So just to set the scene, so obviously, Hitler invaded Poland. Shortly afterwards, invaded places like the Netherlands, France, basically steamrolled them, blitzkrieg tactics, took them over, and then Hitler, he weirdly, interestingly, he didn't actually want to go to war with England. He really respected the British Empire, and he also liked us in terms of our genetics, which is obviously he was massively racist, and he had this whole idea of Aryan supremacy, and he liked anybody that he considered Germanic peoples. So he considered, the English to be Germanic peoples. He included the Scandinavians in that as well. And because, the Scandinavian people are basically an offshoot of Germanic people. If we go back far enough, they would be Germanic people too. And so he really, really liked the Anglos, the English, and he wanted us to be allies with them. And he basically even said, look, as long as you just don't go to war with me and you don't stop me from what I'm doing, I'm not even going to get involved in your business. You know, like the British Empire still had like quite a lot of pull at the time. You know, it was sort of, you know, it was coming to its end. But really, the World War II was almost at the nail in the coffin. At the beginning of World War II, it was different kettle of fish. You know, I think we had the Commonwealth. Obviously, technically, the Commonwealth is still going on today, but it's not the same as it was back in those days. You know what I mean? We had one of the world's most powerful navies, if not the world's most powerful navy, had all these Commonwealth countries. We still had like an empire to call upon. You know, even things like our relations with Australia and Canada, while we still have very good relations to this day, we almost still had like a bit more like pull in what they did. Do you know what I mean? And case in point in that, obviously, we went to war with Germany. Essentially, Australia and New Zealand and Canada just did as well, because you know, they're just the other big English-speaking nations, aren't they? America was the only one that fought in the Revolution and gained their independence. All the other English-speaking countries that were like originally colonies just went to war as well. It was just something that they did. But yeah, so he was basically like, look, you can have your empire. I don't even want to mess with you. I just don't want you to stop what we're doing. But and this is one thing I think we should be proud about as British people as well, because we're the only allied country that went to war with Germany, not because we were invaded, but because to fulfill an oath to an allied country, and obviously that allied country was Poland. So we basically said, look, Germany, look, if you invade Poland, we're going to go to war with you. And it was almost like, they're like, yeah, but are they? You know, but we don't want to beef with you, Britain. We just want to expand our borders and stuff like that. I was like, no. If you invade Poland, we're going to have to declare war on you. And they did it anyway. Called our bluff. Obviously, Neville Chamberlain was the Prime Minister of the UK at the start of the Second World War. He was basically too weak. Winston Churchill came into power and was like, no, you invaded Poland. If we don't fulfill our oath, then we are like oath breakers. That's, you know, really bad morally, ethically, you know, and it sort of sets a bad precedent. Yeah, it sets a bad precedent. So now we are at war with Germany. Hitler's like, okay, well, I don't really want this, but okay, I guess so. Conquered France and the Netherlands and that, and then he started what's Operation Sea Lion. That was the code name for the invasion of the UK, and he very much thought that he could conquer the UK, and this is why we should be very, very proud of the Battle of Britain. And obviously sometimes you hear, you know, you might hear you know, Yanks and stuff try and taunt us by saying things like, you would have been crushed if we didn't save your ass in WW2. And it's like, don't get me wrong, they were sending us, President Roosevelt, who was the President of the United States at the time, he was sending us resources from across the Atlantic, like, you know, like ammunition and steel and stuff. But obviously at that point, we won the Battle of Britain basically without any help from the Americans, other than maybe some, you know, some supplies that were sent. Yeah, some supplies that were sent across the Atlantic. So, you know, I think Britain should really hold their heads up high for that as a nation. Do you know what I mean? And it's only a couple of generations removed as well. Do you know what I mean? We all thank our families for that. You know, anybody that's been living in Britain long enough for our ancestry just to go back a couple of generations, everyone chipped in. You know, women started working in the factories. Women started, you know, working in the military in like the RAF rooms and stuff like that. Every single man would have been, you know, like chipping in. If you weren't a farmer and you were like trying to provide food for people, you were like in the military or doing something to help the war effort in some way. So I think, you know, the fact that Hitler thought that he could just invade the UK, but, you know, not only were we so tough and so unwilling to yield, even say when Hitler started the Blitz and we were just like bombing, and he really thought that he would essentially bomb us into submission, yeah. And he thought that he would just like make our morale so bad we'd almost be like pleading with Winston Churchill to surrender. Instead, what happened was, and this is what another thing I think about the British character, which I think, you know, we should be proud of, is the opposite happened. The more he bombed us, the more just annoyed the British people got, and the more we wanted to go to war with Hitler, which I think is a good attribute. You know, it's the opposite of cowardice, isn't it? You know, it's the opposite of cowardice. But on a technological side, you know, Britain really amazing technology. When the Luftwaffe, which is the name of the German Air Force, started, you know, crossing the English Channel to try and bomb and, you know, invade England from the skies, they could not understand why every time they would try and do it, the RAF would intercept them and start shooting down their planes. They didn't understand it. They were like, how are these people just like, how do they know where we're coming from? How do they know what we're doing? And it was really amazing, actually. It's like the forefront of technology. As I said, Bullwinkle, I will pass back to you in a second, but it's just really interesting how the technology, you know, how technology was a massive factor in us winning the Battle of Britain. They'd made these like state of the art for the time radio towers all across the edge of the UK, like all across the edge. And basically, as soon as a plane would get picked up on this little radar, they just know exactly, obviously, where the Luftwaffe were coming in, and they'd instantly just send the RAF out to intercept it. And that might sound obvious to us today, but at the start of the Battle of Britain, that was like a new thing. That was almost like state-of-the-art British technology.
That's crazy, isn't it?
The Luftwaffe didn't understand it. They were like, you know, they were still sort of just going by like, you know, almost like what you see and preparing with maps beforehand. And yeah, we had these like crazy defences of these radars, and then so it was like so precise. As soon as we would see that some planes were coming over and they weren't verified, boom, send the RAF to intercept it. We'd shoot them down. Obviously, the Battle of Britain went on for a long time. But yeah, and you know, lots of Polish fighters fought in the Battle of Britain, because a lot of Poles that, you know, Polish fighter squadron pilots and stuff that got evacuated from Poland before Germany overwhelmed Poland. You know, they fought in the Battle of Britain too. You know, obviously we needed every fighter pilot we could get. But
with the Blitz, would that have just been planes that got through then?
Yeah, and I also think that this is just off the top of my head. I think after a while, Hitler started doing nighttime raids as well, and that was a lot. It was a lot harder, obviously. Like, even if you scrambled the planes to go and see, it was a lot harder for the RAF planes to like see, to see the the enemy planes in the skies and stuff.
I guess
so
it's like a dark, foggy night.
Yeah, exactly.
You got no chance, have you?
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't like the mad frickin' fighter planes you got today, where it just like locks on the screen and says, you know, and you just like deploy missile or whatever like that. You know, I mean, there was still like it was still almost like more like manual combat.
Yeah, lights.
But,
this is my point. This is so crazy, like how different the war actually was fought.
Oh yeah,
like the fact that the RAF was such a big thing and everyone was getting in Spitfires and flying up there to defend our land. It's just, you wouldn't have that today unless there was a World War. There's a famous quote, isn't there, that however World War III is fought, World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
Oh,
something like that.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're on about. Yeah, because the idea that it would be so nuclear, it would be so just total
that you'd just be reset.
Yeah, it would just be a hard reset. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, crazy. But
it's crazy how much of a crossroads it was as well, wasn't it? World War II. It's the ultimate crossroads in our history, probably as humans, where you could have gone down either route of the Allies or the Axis winning, and obviously we went down the good versus the evil, and luckily the good triumphed. But it's crazy just how much different the world would be today if that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and obviously at the start of the war, the Nazis were winning. You know, as I said, the first sort of blow to Hitler was Britain winning the Battle of Britain. But I think obviously
downhill from there.
Well, yeah, that's it. I mean, it kind of did, because we won the Battle of Britain in 1940. And even though it was a defensive victory, it wasn't an offensive victory, but it still basically was like, essentially Hitler failed to invade Britain.
If he continued the planes and that, he was like, right, I'm just taking my resources out elsewhere.
Man, he had to give up. We forced him to give up because they were losing so many planes and all the rest of it that essentially their infrastructure could not keep up with it. Not only that, but by the end of the Battle of Britain, the RAF had become so good at counter assault, so we were sending our bombers over to Germany. We were bombing their like plane manufacturing like factories and stuff, so they couldn't keep up. Well, if they were say losing, and we really the British the RAF really was like thrashing them in aerial like combat. So I think there were like some aerial combats where say like 74 Luftwaffe planes were downed and only like 23 the RAF ones.
Was it a completely aerial battle? There was no like ships or anything?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Luftwaffe were targeting ships like in the English Channel and stuff. That was one of the main things that the RAF were often sent out to intercept in the English Channel when they would pick up on the radar. Because obviously the Germans were trying to, any supplies that were getting into the UK, they were trying to get rid of them. But the Battle of Britain was pretty much solely fought in the skies. Crazy. And that's why there's that Winston Churchill quote, which is something like, never in the history of a nation has so much been owed to so few. Because obviously what he's obviously getting at there is there's only a tiny percent of the population, even in World War II, that was actually a fighter pilot. Everybody else was doing a different job, even if you were in the military. So the fact that you owe your entire freedom and the fact that you haven't been invaded just to the people that are in the RAF is kind of crazy, isn't it? Which is why obviously he had such respectful and honest, quote by him.
Would they have been training up? So the RAF at the time, I suppose there was such a demand for pilots. Would there have been people that at the start of the Battle of Britain or the start of the war altogether, I guess, would have signed up, never knew anything about planes, hadn't ever been in the plane,
100%.
And within like a couple months they're out there flying, trying to defend the country.
100%.
That's crazy.
There were some like 18-year-old lads and stuff that were like barely out of school, and they would have like three months training, and then they'd be up in the skies. That's mad, isn't it?
That's insane.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
That is crazy, because you almost like you think that by nowadays standards, you think that like, oh yeah, surely you'd have to have like years of training or something.
Yeah.
I reckon I'd be a good sniper, but I'd be an absolute crap air pilot.
Yeah?
Yeah, I don't know. I just think like I'm not bad at driving, but just not. It's just awareness. I just
you'd
get
be like,
shoot.
You'd be more like a Japanese kamikaze.
Yeah,
pilot,
I would be like a kamikaze pilot. That would be my thing. It'd go in all blazing, spinning around everywhere, doing some crazy stuff, maybe shooting a few down, and then just crashing and burning.
You'd be like, I'm out of ammunition. I'll just drive into the fucking bridge. I'll just drive into their ship.
I wouldn't mind going fast, like at all. But it would be I'd just crash it.
Do you know what I like the idea of, Drew? That in World War II, you'd start your own fighter squadron, and my reason being is because one of the interesting tidbit of talking about the aerial supremacy and stuff and the fighter pilots during World War II is one thing I think is quite interesting is, say, like the RAF in like the Spitfire planes, for example, they use Rolls-Royce engines, which is really interesting because everybody knows what a Rolls-Royce is. In the Luftwaffe, in the German planes, they use BMW engines, right? So it's like automotive history.
Yeah.
In the Japanese planes, they use Suzuki engines, and I like the idea that Drew would start his own fighter squadron, but they'd use Subaru engines.
Brilliant. I can't believe I never got a Subaru.
I can't believe it either. It was always like your goal, man, in school. It was like, I think that was the first thing you ever said to me was, do you like this picture of my Subaru? And I was like, yeah, it's all right. Like, what would you even say to that?
That is so weird. I remember
it was pretty good. You used to get max power. What's that?
You know that magazine?
Like a game?
No, there's a magazine called Max Power, and it was about it was about modified cars.
Mate, that's so funny, Drew.
And I
love how like nowadays you buy like a magazine on how to like mod a guitar, like those Chipsons you were telling about.
Yeah.
But back in those days, it was like how to mod your Subaru.
But I'm like a crap mechanic as well. Like I don't know anything about like mechanics and stuff. Like my dad was like a real good mechanic and would always be like changing stuff in the car.
Tinkering.
But it was more like how fast does it go and what are the aesthetics of it? Of just like you know what I mean?
It is quite surprising, really, isn't it, that over the years you never ended up getting a Subaru? Because there's nothing stopping you.
No,
you could buy a Subaru right now. I mean, you could sell your Honda, buy a cheap Subaru.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
You might have to do it.
You've never done it. Mate, you have to do it. Yeah, you have to do it.
4-wheel drive, super massive turbo on it and that. I reckon that'd be well fun. Would you want an Impreza? Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard that, are they called Foresters? I've heard that apparently the Subaru Foresters, they're basically their equivalent of like a
4x4 kind of
4x4 SUV sort of thing. Apparently they're actually really good. Apparently they're like really, if you want like a really reliable, good big car, which is obviously like practical, got loads of loading space. If you're the sort of person that needs to load up lots of kit, right? Whether you're like a musician or maybe like a gardener or something like that, needs like a lawnmower in the back. And apparently they're really good, really reliable, and apparently they're legit off-roaders as well.
Nice.
Obviously, like relatively, they're not going to be like a Land Rover Defender, but like you could get. You could drive through like really sleety mud and stuff like that and you wouldn't get stuck. Whereas a lot of like the more like BMW and Mercedes 4x4s, it's more like they're more like you're not actually ever going to drive them off road. Do you know what I mean? They're more for like rich wives to do the school run on, aren't they? You know what I mean?
Yeah, they look cool.
But, yeah. Oh, he's thinking now.
2006 for $7,000.
He's thinking. Now I'm in my 30s. Maybe I could be a mature Subaru owner.
Yeah, and it would still...
rather than having an Impreza, I can have the practicality, but
4x4.
Good family wagon,
4x4. Still a Subaru.
Load up your music kit, but scratching that itch of the Subaru.
Oh, that's cool.
You're going to have to do it, Drew. Subaru Forester.
Oh, there's this guy. There's this guy like where I walk the dog, and it's this old boy, and he's got like a 1996 or 1997 like Jeep, and it looks so cool. And I spoke to him the other day, and I was
Wrangler.
like, yeah, it's I don't know if a Wrangler's quite big. It seems quite a bit smaller. It's like a smaller Jeep with like
Wranglers
a canvas.
are like yeah, that's a Wrangler. Yeah. So you've got like the Grand Jeep Cherokees, which are like the big sort of like SUV type ones, which are like almost a bit like my Volkswagen, but like, you know, Jeep equivalent. And then you've got the Wranglers, which are the ones that are almost like the American equivalent of a Defender. Yeah. But they're quite small and nifty. And you can get them really big. So you can get modern day Wranglers are like massive. But the old school Jeep Wranglers, if they're just like a 2-door one, with like the flat...
Because you can get longer ones, can't you? You can get longer Wranglers and you can get the shorter ones. It's a shorter one that he's got, and it's I think it's like framed with a canvas back and stuff, and it just looks so cool. I'm like, it looks quite retro, but like it's real good off road, you know. It would be like it's a real nice or I think it'd be like a real nice like summer vehicle, because I always think when I look at them, I'm like, if it's like, you know, they were obviously designed for more American climates, and don't get me wrong, obviously there are parts in America where it rains all the time, like the East Coast and stuff, but you know, if you live in somewhere like Arizona, you know, Colorado, Texas, you can probably get away with driving around like an open top Jeep all the time, or at least most of the time. In the UK, it rains too much, and I question with that, just like that little flimsy thing, if it was tanking it down with rain, the last thing you want is to be driving on the motorway and it's just like you can get them fully fully like metal as well,
like a hard top
one, so it'd have to be one of those, wouldn't it? You wouldn't get a canvas on.
In the UK it would have to be, wouldn't it? They seem to hold their price value pretty well. It's because they're iconic, isn't it? They're iconic vehicles.
They're quite expensive. They're like some of the best off-roaders. Ones.
They're like some of the best off-roaders in the world as well. And a little bit of military history. And actually, this is World War II history as well. So the British were so impressed with the capability of Jeep Wranglers during, or I don't know if they were actually Wranglers. I think it might have been a very, very early form of Jeep Wrangler. It was definitely Jeep anyway. They were so impressed with the capability of Jeeps during World War II that they basically made their own equivalent, and that is when the British made the Land Rover Defender.
Wow.
So the Land Rover Defender is essentially based on a Jeep Wrangler.
The Land Rover Defender is like a war car?
Yeah.
Mate,
it's mad how many like, different types vehicle. You get now of like the Defenders and stuff, and like
then Range Rover came out of that.
Yeah,
like you say, it's insane just like how much development happened in those years of World War II.
The Brits didn't have a vehicle that size that performed the same way that a Jeep did. And they were so impressed by it, they were basically like, right, we're going to take this as a blueprint, but we're going to make our own version. So they made the Land Rover Defender.
So it's Jeep American?
Yeah. Jeep's American, And Land Rover, so basically we just essentially copied the Americans. So a Land Rover Defender is essentially the British copy of a Jeep Wrangler.
That's crazy. That's so cool.
Yeah, really interesting,
I want one.
They are cool, aren't they? I always think, like, that's a cool vehicle. You want to be, like, on a summer's day, driving around in a Jeep, listening to some metal, listening to some, like, Injustice for All or Metallica, you know?
Because I do like those little what is it? Was it a Suzuki? You can get these little. They look like a little bit like the Jeeps.
Jimneys.
Yeah, the Jimneys, like the newer type of Jimneys that are a bit more square and stuff. But they just look like a beefed up Jimny, like the Jeeps do.
Yeah. They're quite cool, aren't they? Oh man, look! Isn't that crazy? I typed in Jeep Wrangler Land Rover Defender because I was hoping to see like an old school picture, but they've got the modern day equivalents. And isn't it mad how like technology goes? So this is like the modern day massive Jeep Wrangler versus a modern day obviously like Land Rover Defender here. Crazy. But what I wanted to find was a retro picture, like an old school picture, you know, from like back in the day.
Like the really early discoveries. I can't even think of it.
WW2. Oh, so this is an old school Land Rover Defender.
Oh yeah,
when they were first made for the British Army.
Looks like out of Thomas Tank Engine.
Oh, and there's an old school Jeep Wrangler.
That still looks cool.
Look at that. That looks cool. I mean, to be fair, that's drawing, isn't it? That's not actually a picture, but I mean, that still would have been what they look like. Let's actually try and find an actual picture. Oh, is this it? Or is this still like a Land Rover? I don't know. Oh no, that's a Land Rover. You can see the Land Rover badge just about.
Land Rover. It's a pretty cool name as well.
It is, isn't it? It roves over the land. It's a Land Rover. Oh, that's an old school World War II Jeep. Look, it's got this little star on it and that.
Yeah.
And then I think the one that you're on about, Drew, was this.
Yeah.
That's
it.
This one that old boy must have. This
That's
is more
the
like
one.
an 80s, 90s one. This is a World War II era one.
They
Yeah.
are very cool.
They are very cool, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
It-
Cool vehicles.
So obviously a Land Rover Defender, like sort of more like pickup.
Because I wondered,
mod.
you look at the Jeep as well, and I'm looking at some Jeeps and like the 90s ones, and they're all like 4 litre and stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, it's definitely American.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like gas guzzlers. I hope you got a lot of money for fuel.
yeah.
Because they're not going to do much good on the miles per gallon.
No. That's crazy.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think with World War II though, I think one of the things it sort of teaches you is not only, as I said, is it that good sort of like moral of the story ethics in terms of say like the British should be able to hold their heads up high. That I say we went to war with Germany not because we were invaded, which don't get me wrong is obviously a very good reason to go to war with someone, but it was. I see it as like a moral of the story or like an ethical tale. Do you know what I mean? To fulfill an obligation, you know, to not go back on your word. If you tell somebody you're going to do something for somebody, then you're going to do it. And, you know, and sticking up for people when the chips are down. Because it's very easily not to, isn't it? You know?
Especially if
But
like
it's
your
very
lives are on the line and stuff, you know? It's like,
100%.
oh, we're going to
Yeah.
actually, our men are going to die and stuff
Yeah.
for someone
Yeah.
else's country.
Yeah. And
It's crazy how like the war that spanned over like multiple years really came down to like certain events as well.
oh, yeah.
You know, like the Battle
definitely.
of Stalingrad and stuff like that.
Yep, Stalingrad, the bloodiest, nastiest battle of the entire World War II. 100%.
What is
I
that?
tell you what, when you hear
film
about, oh man, you should. When you hear about Stalingrad, it literally sounds like if you were a soldier fighting in Stalingrad, it literally sounds like being in hell.
Yeah.
Like I think it would have been so bad, you might as well have been in hell. And I'll explain in a little bit of detail why I think that is in a second. But yeah, I think, you know, World War II, it's a combination of why it's important to remain steadfast in life. You know, we all obviously go through bad periods. We all have really bad days. Sometimes we have bad years, you know, but sort of try and remain steadfast. If you remain steadfast and you don't give up and stuff like that, it'll be amazing what happens in the long run. There's an old Viking saying, which is, luck will often save a man if his courage holds, you know. And that sort of goes hand in hand with that, I think. You know, and let's face it, we probably wouldn't have won World War II if it wasn't for what seems like a very almost convenient sequence of events, you know, which would have been very almost like quite easily avoided by Hitler and maybe even the Japanese to an extent. Although I would say arguably the Japanese did a better job at not making mistakes than the Germans did. In fact, I'd say they definitely did. But the Japanese, even though they were brutal during the Second World War, they were actually very impressive, to be fair to them. What they managed to achieve, just purely on an analytical, from an analytical standpoint, was very, very impressive. But
why did
Can I just add? Oh, sorry,
just gonna say, like with Japan, like why did Japan like team up with Hitler and stuff?
Right, so it's all sort of so during the First World War, the Japanese were on our side. So in the First World War, they fought on the side of the Allies, along with like the British and the French and stuff, against the Germans. At the end of the First World War, there was big meetings in Europe, and only 5 countries were invited. And Japan were given the honour of being one of the 5 countries that were invited to this summit meeting, which I think maybe it was in Paris. I can't remember, to be honest with you guys, but I know it was a very, very big, important meeting. It's like, you know, and the same thing happened post World War II. It's basically like what's going to happen now? Where are we going to go forward politically? And blah blah blah. Japan were invited, which they were very happy about. Around that time, Japan very much respected and looked up to Western culture. So they very much respected the UK, they very much respected the US and other Western countries. But what they wanted was to be more like included and almost like adopted by the West. So in that regard, they showed us an honour. You know, they were like, they loved British fashion. You know, you'd have Japanese men walking around. Only a generation before, they'd have been walking around in kimonos and stuff. You'd see them walking around in full British suits with top hats and stuff in Japan. You know, they'd adopted full democracies, so they became a democratic country. You know, very obviously similar to how the West was run. Well, exactly the same way that the West was run. And they basically said to the West, we want to be more integrated to the West, and we want to like sign these deals with you where Japanese people can go to universities all across the West and, you know, America, Britain, etc., and that Japanese citizens can like move to places like the UK and the US if we want to, and we would like to do these deals with you, but we'll make it very easy to do so. And to be fair, I don't blame the Japanese at all for this. But the British and the Americans essentially were like, no. They basically were like, no, we don't want you here. That's essentially what they were like. They were like, no, we don't really want you here. We'd rather we just didn't do that, to be honest. And that built up a massive amount of resentment in the Japanese people. They really resented us. They felt that we'd sort of like, you know, they'd put an offer of, they'd put out like this hand of friendship. We'd sort of dissed them up. We'd thrown it back in their face. We were like, no, actually, we don't particularly care about being friends with you. We're this like great. The West is this great place. We're not really that fussed whether you're a part of it or not. To be honest with you, obviously you've got to bear in mind as well that respect was a massive thing in Japanese culture. I think sometimes people think that samurais were this thing that were around like 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
Nope.
Samurai was that whole like samurai dynasty thing.
It was like that, wasn't it?
Like you know, more recent than that, man. Yeah. So a lot of the Japanese soldiers that fought in World War II, their dads would have literally been samurai. Their dads and granddads were samurai, right? So respect obviously is massive in samurai culture, and it's almost like death before dishonor. You know, that's their mentality: death before dishonor. You know, they would rather literally die than be disrespected. That's the samurai way. That's the samurai culture. So there was a lot of resentment that I built as a result of their relations with us. And then what happened was there was a massive economic collapse in America post-World War One. It's quite a famous one, isn't it? I can't remember what it's called now off the top of my head. It's not the Depression, is it?
No, Great Depression.
Or was that post-World War Two? Do you reckon you could check that for me?
I'll fact check.
Check out like the post-World War One American economic crisis. But anyway... Japan got 80% of their oil from America. They also got lots of their other resources from America. So when the American economy collapsed, it had a really negative effect on Japan, and they essentially went into poverty. So not only had the West disrespected them, but because they relied on on America so much for like trade and stuff. So not only had they been dissed up by the Americans, but then through no fault of their own country then went into like poverty, and people were literally like starving. Apparently men were so poor, they were selling their own daughters into prostitution because otherwise their other kids and their wife would starve. That's how bad it was. So this massive sense of resentment started being builded towards the West in Japan. And another thing they really resented was what they thought was quite hypocritical, was that, say, the British Empire owned several parts of Asia through conquer. France owned several parts of Asia through conquer. But essentially the West had said, you're not allowed to conquer any of these places, though. Even though I know that you want to sort of like expand and blah, 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 you're not allowed to do that, though. Okay? We're allowed to do it, but you're not allowed to do it. So then they were basically like, screw these guys. And then, that basically then led to... sort of like this nationalist movement sort of rising up in Japan, where all of these people were very bitter, resentful towards the West. They were like, screw this, we are Japan, we are the samurai culture, we're all about like respect, you know, and honor. We are going to show these countries basically not to disrespect us. And then they started invading places like China, and then they basically made a non-aggression pact with Hitler. And then they basically agreed that, we will fight on your side on the Eastern Front in the Pacific arena. So on paper, the three Axis powers were, Japan, Nazi Germany, and Mussolini's Italy. Those were like the three big Axis powers. Was Mussolini's Italy, Nazi Germany, and Japan. And to be fair to Japan, they essentially, like, whether it was good or bad, they kicked ass at the beginning of World War II.
This
They
was going to be
absolutely
my
kicked
question,
ass.
was because obviously at the start it was looking pretty bad, particularly after Germany conquering Poland and France. Did they have bigger armies, or was it literally just their like blitzkrieg tactics?
What, the Germans?
Yeah.
France, I believe I'm right in saying, had the largest army in the world at the beginning of World War II.
That's crazy.
Not necessarily the best, but the largest army. And Hitler was actually very concerned. I think it was called the Legion d'Honneur. I think that's what the French army was called at the beginning of World War II. And Hitler was really, really concerned and worried about the French army. And that's why he was almost like so amazed, and why it went to his head so much when the Germans conquered all of France. I think it was like within a month. He basically he broke through the Ardennes. Sorry, just made me think of Peep Show. Mark always references the Ardennes, and it always cracks me up. It's the Ardennes all over again. So the Ardennes is this massive, basically, wall of forest that goes around the east coast of France, and the French thought it was impenetrable, so they didn't bother guarding it. They guarded like all the little gaps in it, and what Hitler fought during the First World War, and obviously World War One was famous for trench warfare, and it was awful warfare. It was like you'd gain a few meters, and then you'd lose a few meters, and then you'd gain a few, and it was like, meanwhile, everyone's dying, everyone's getting trench foot, everyone's getting bit by rats at night, like really just miserable, nasty
horrible
warfare.
Yeah.
So Hitler was like, right, this is not going to be how we're going to conduct World War II. So he basically made the best tanks in the world, Tiger tanks, and they were called Panzer divisions anyway. I can't remember. There was Tiger tanks, and there was another type of tank they used as well. But they were the fastest tanks in the world, and they were essentially the best tanks in the world. And he just basically blitzed through the Ardennes. He just like smashed through the forests, flanked the French forces. All the tank drivers were on loads of methamphetamine. Meanwhile, the French soldiers were in their rations they had like wine. In the German rations they had meth. So the Germans were like wired. They would literally be awake for I think it was like 48 hours at a time, just hooked up on ridiculous amounts of meth, and then they would just switch the driver. So then basically this guy would basically go on like a 48-day sleep, while the other one would go 48 days of meth in like fuel, just rampage. So they would never sleep. So they would fight day and night. So they drive all through the night, fight all through the day. They completely overwhelmed the French. The French were apparently terrified. Of these like meth head, Panzer divisions. Just because apparently it makes you quite violent as well. Like meth makes you crazy and it makes you violent. So you're almost like feral. You almost like become a bit like this crazy feral beast, like almost like you've got rabies or something. And apparently there's even like reports of like French people saying like it was like terrifying, because there'd be like German tank drivers and they'd be like sticking up out of their thing but with the controls, and they just had this mental look on their face, and they were just like bulldozing through the buildings and just killing everyone, like literally running people over and then like shooting their cannons. And it was like, if you were like there witnessing that, it's like terrifying.
It's crazy that Germany was allowed to prepare in that sense while still being under the laws that they were put on after World War One. Sorry, what was the name of the laws? Because that was a big reason for World War II, wasn't it? Sort of brewed a lot of hostility within Germany.
What, the Treaty of Versailles?
Yes, the Treaty of Versailles.
Yeah,
they weren't actually allowed to like raise an army or anything. But
yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't know about too much about that, man. To be honest, that's one gap in my knowledge. But I mean, they obviously did. So, like,
I think
they built the best.
I think it was one of those things where this was part of the reason why Neville Chamberlain was like seen as weak.
Yes.
Was they essentially had these rules from the Treaty of Versailles that they weren't actually allowed to build an army or weren't allowed these certain things.
I think basically as soon as Hitler came into power, he just did.
Yeah.
I just think
essentially
he
was just like trying. He was pushing the boat as much as he could, being like, "Can I do this?"
Yeah.
And he would do it, and nothing really would happen from it.
Yeah.
And like the other countries that were supposed to be enforcing it would be like, "Well, shouldn't be doing that."
Yeah, I think it was. I think there was a lot of that. Yeah, I think you're 100% right, man. Yeah, it was almost a bit like, it was like pushing us luck.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not actually doing anything about it though. So I'll push my luck a little bit more. Oh, they're still not doing anything about it.
But it's crazy that it got to the extent that he was able to raise an entire army for a war of that size.
Yeah.
Especially one that he at one point was
millions.
winning.
He had millions and millions of Nazi soldiers. Yeah, millions and millions of Nazi soldiers. Yeah. I said best tanks in the world. The Luftwaffe were amazing as well. To be fair, they were a great air force. I mean, I know I was saying about how until the Battle of Britain, until the Luftwaffe encountered the Spitfire, they hadn't encountered a plane that was as good as the Messerschmitt, which was the Luftwaffe's fighter plane. They didn't think that one existed. But obviously, one thing that Britain's always been good for, and we were even better at back then, was we were at the forefront of world technology in those days. Radar, planes, engines. So, the Germans were almost taken a little bit aback when they came across the Spitfire, because they didn't think there was a plane in the world that could compete with the Messerschmitt. But regardless of how good the Spitfire was, the Messerschmitt was an amazing plane as well. The Messerschmitt was an amazing plane. So they had great air force, the world's best tanks, good guns. They were very well kitted out. They were very well kitted out. But yeah, say with sort of the Japanese, going back to the Japanese a little bit. They made great gains. To be fair, they invaded and took large parts of China. They did awful things to the Chinese people. But they took a lot of China. They took a lot of what is modern day Indonesia, Thailand. I think Vietnam as well. They conquered. What was crazy was, to be honest as well, and I just being honest, because it's hard to mince your words when you're saying this, is the Americans did very, very badly at first during World War II. They were almost, I would say that it's hard to describe their actions as anything other than like a bit dumb, right? So America were obviously this massive power, massive industrial power, like insanely massive industrial power, and had like massive resources, but just made like really, really stupid mistakes, They had intelligence reports saying that basically that it was just a matter of time until Japan were going to, declare war essentially on America. America moved all of their navy to Pearl Harbor, which is in Hawaii, and they did this, and it was, it's a good, it makes sense why they did it. They basically thought Hawaii is so far away from mainland America. They thought if we put all our navy here, that's quite intimidating for the Japanese. They're like over here, like they're basically to like the west of Hawaii, where you find places like modern day Indonesia and that, and they're like capturing all these places, and Japan's sort of like to the northwest of Hawaii, and suddenly you've got this insanely massive naval fleet, super powerful aircraft carriers and destroyers, and that's quite intimidating for the Japanese to think like, oh man, okay, they're like, this is quite intimidating having all this presence here. But they had intelligence reports that basically it was just a matter of time until the Japanese sort of declared war on the US, but they didn't know exactly where and exactly when. And I think they thought that they were going to do it by invading some like airfield that was in like one of the like countries in Asia where there was like an Allied Air Force base or something like that. They didn't conceive for a second, which is quite stupid really, because you'd think that you would cover all of your bases and you would basically make a plan for every scenario, wouldn't you? They never in a million years thought that Japan would basically have the confidence to actually attack Pearl Harbor, and that's why they just didn't defend for it. They weren't ready for it. And not only that, and to be fair, I don't think Britain in a million years would have made this mistake. If you see how well orchestrated the Battle of Britain was, it was almost like everything was perfect down to a T. It's almost like Britain didn't make a single strategic error during the Battle of Britain. And I'm saying this completely unbiased. I'm not saying this as a British man. I'm saying this objectively. You can go and research this yourself. Very, very impressive defensive operation by the British during the Battle of Britain. The Americans, complete opposite. They didn't almost like even bother to think that the Japanese might attack Pearl Harbor. Not only that, but apparently the American naval men and pilots and stuff like that were stationed in Hawaii were having such a good time there. They were just treating it like a holiday. So they got sent there essentially like, okay, any day now America might go to war with Japan. And it's important to mention obviously that up until this point, America weren't technically at war with Japan or Germany. In fact, President Roosevelt made a promise to the American people that he would not go to war with Hitler. So he would send supplies across to Europe to help Britain and stuff. But he basically made a promise. He said, like, we will, unless we are attacked, I will not join World War II. But they had all these intelligence reports. Okay, Japan not backing down. Basically, the Allies had said, like, look, you need to stop invading parts of Asia. You need to, like, go back to Japan and behave yourselves. And Japan were basically just like, no. But they got all these intelligence reports that Japan were probably going to invade Pearl Harbor. not invade Pearl Harbor, but attack the Americans. They didn't even bother to conceive that it could have been Pearl Harbor. All the American soldiers there were just treating it like a vacation. They were getting with Hawaiian girls, they were drinking, they were smoking cigars, sunbathing, going for swims and that. Which is quite crazy, really. Do you know what I mean? Like, at any second, they could have been called to war, but they're just like chilling, like listening.
Making most of it.
You can just imagine them with all those little, like, Hawaiian skirts on and stuff, and like those little, like, what was it? Those little necklaces they wear and that, just like chilling out, like drinking cocktails and stuff.
Aloha.
Apparently, it was so mental. This is how bad the American defense was. That there were these 2 young lads that were out in the American radar tower in Pearl Harbor, and obviously it was their job to call down to HQ on the island if anything popped up on the radar that seemed off. Japan were very, very clever with how they invaded Pearl Harbor as well, so they sent this massive navy all up to the Arctic, right? So they went all the way through the ice and stuff, because they knew there were like American ships and planes that would obviously go around and just look for, they were used basically for intelligence. They were just, for intelligence reports and stuff like that. Okay, are there any enemy ships in the area, that sort of thing. So the Japanese, knowing this, they went all the way up to the Arctic, and they, like, there's videos of these, you can watch videos of, like, the Japanese Navy, like, going through the ice, and they're all, like, dressed up almost like Eskimos. And so they went all across the top, and then they came directly down then in a straight line, and they were just hoping, essentially, that they wouldn't be spotted, and they weren't, so they had luck on their side in that regard. But back to these 2 lads in the radar tower. These 2 lads suddenly realised that there was a massive air force that was on its way to Pearl Harbor. And obviously, because it was from the aircraft carriers, there was these massive aircraft carriers the Japanese had that they sent up their planes on. And so all these planes coming towards Pearl Harbor. So the 2 lads, radioed down to HQ and were like, there's like all these planes coming towards Pearl Harbor, guys. Like, what should we do? What should we do? And apparently, like their senior officers and stuff were just like, don't worry about it. And they were like, what do you mean, don't worry about it? And they were like, oh, it's probably just American ships from the mainland that are coming over, and there's just been some lacks in the communication. It's probably just people coming over from California. Don't worry about it. They were like, are you sure about this? Like, there's quite a lot of them coming. Do you not think that we should at least raise these concerns to the American Air Force bases and stuff on the island? And they were like, nah, don't worry. It's probably nothing. But the thing is, I think that's so crazy, because it's like the idea that you just say it's probably nothing. Like, that's you've madness, been told from intelligent reports that you're going to get attacked like any day now, essentially. It's bad enough that all your soldiers are just like swooning around on the island, and then you're just not taking this seriously. Apparently, this is how bad it was. Apparently, there were all the Navy, the Navy personnel. Were literally on their decks, because a lot of them, while they'd be off decks, chilling out, they'd like rotate it, but some of them would still have to like scrub the decks and stuff every day. So there'd be like the Navy guys, and they'd be like scrubbing the decks, and there'd be people on the beaches and stuff like that. And they literally even started seeing these Japanese planes coming over. And they were like, but apparently, rather than like sounding the alarm and stuff, they were like, oh, that's a bit weird, isn't it? And they were just like, oh, that's a bit weird. Like, oh,
Madness. Like, crazy.
Can't really recognise that sort of shape of plane. Well, that's a bit weird, isn't it? Like, oh, it's probably nothing. Just don't worry about it. And then, so everyone was just chilling the hell out. And then all of these Japanese planes just started, like, bombing savagely the American aircraft carriers, the planes, the runways and everything. So none of the planes could take off, because essentially within minutes, the Japanese just completely destroyed all the runways. So and all the planes that were just sitting out there on the tarmac, right? Not to make this worse as well. And you can see why he did this. I can't remember the name of the officer that did this. I think he might have been called something like General Short. But basically, he was in charge of the aircraft. He was in charge of the air bases in Hawaii, and Hawaii had a lot of people from Japanese descendants living on the island. So this American guy, was paranoid that some of the people with Japanese descendants might come and try and sabotage the planes in the night, like put bombs on them, just try and sabotage them in any way. So he stacked them basically up all together in this nice little bunched up way on these runways, so they could easily be monitored at all times, which is good in terms of making sure that people can't sneak around and sabotage in the middle of the night. But it also made it really easy then for the Japanese planes to just come and destroy them, because they were all just bundled together. So they basically just dropped all these bombs, boom, all the American planes are destroyed. They then obviously bombed all of the American destroyers, aircraft carriers, everything like that. The Americans were literally caught like sitting ducks. It's considered like a humiliating, obviously awful, but also humiliating loss for the Americans, because, you know, they were one of, if not the greatest power on the planet at the time, and they were just basically caught almost like sleeping ducks. Just, you know, had intelligence reports, didn't really take them seriously, had radar, didn't take that seriously. Even when they saw them visibly with their own eyes, there was no like, right, red alert, you know, let's get the planes up. There was, oh, that's weird, you know. So it's considered this, like, you know, it almost sounds like, it's hard not to hear it and just think, it's just a bit dumb. You know what I mean? It's a bit dumb. I say that as like a massive fan of Americans.
Did they literally like destroy it completely?
The Japanese killed thousands and thousands of American servicemen, of American Navy officers, destroyed loads and loads of ships. The admiral of the fleet, who I think his name was Admiral Kimmel, the American guy. The admiral of the fleet was Admiral Kimmel. He was basically essentially responsible for all the failures because he was the top dog. He was there. You know what I mean? He should have said to his personnel, anybody sees anything dodgy on radar, you know, at least amber alert. You know, amber alert, possibly red alert. He should have said to everyone, be ready at all times. Instead, he was basically snoozing, so everyone else was snoozing. Because if your superior officer is basically saying, you know, don't worry, then you're not going to worry. So he basically took full responsibility for the thing. Apparently, he was so negatively affected by the day, and he was so almost like traumatized by his own failings. He said the only thing that would have made the day better from his point of view was if he was killed in the assault. That's how bad he felt about it. But he basically was then, I can't remember if he resigned or if he was made to step down, probably a bit of both. He basically stepped down and he was replaced by a new admiral. I can't remember the name of the new admiral. I should do, really, because it's like a respect thing. But the new admiral that came in, basically he was like a great American naval officer, and he was basically right, you know, there's nothing we can do about the fact that like thousands of Americans have been killed. There's nothing we can do about all the you know, the ships that have been destroyed in the sea or the planes. He was like, what we need to do now is we need to turn this around. So apparently it was a really, really good quote. I think it's one of the aircraft carriers. I think quite amazingly, and I think this is one of these things, yet again, it's almost like sheer luck. And this is one of those things where I said earlier on, the fact that we won, there's almost like a lot of like strange coincidences that led to the Allied forces winning World War II, and this is one of them. Just by pure coincidence, apparently, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 of the Americans' aircraft carriers were somehow like unscathed. Like they were like, it looked like, do you know what I mean? Because there was so much destruction everywhere, and there was just like smoke and flames and so many other ships around it. At the time, it almost just like everything was destroyed. But then once the smoke dust had settled, they'd realised that their aircraft carriers, which were actually the things they needed the most, were actually okay. So that was a stroke of luck. I can't remember how many aircraft carriers were damaged, but apparently there's this famous quote where the new admiral that came in, said to his like top engineers when they were like surveying the destruction, said, "How long is it going to take us to get these aircraft carriers ship shape again?" And he said something like 8 months. And he said, you've got 3 days. And to be fair, within 3 days, they were ready to go. I think that just goes to show how much of an industrial juggernaut America is. Like, when they actually use their brains and they use their resources, you can't beat them. You can't beat them. But, they at times they can be a bit sluggish, you know?
After the events of Pearl Harbor, because obviously now it's sort of accepted, isn't it, that was bad for the Axis because America getting involved sort of started the end, didn't it?
Yes.
In a sense.
Yeah.
Was Germany and Hitler's reaction to that like, what the hell are you doing?
To who? Sorry, to Japan.
Japan?
No, I don't think so at all. No, I don't. From what I know, not at all. I think that basically Hitler was almost like, good, you know, like, Japan's going to take care of America, and if not, then by the time we've beaten the Soviet Union and Britain and everything, we will just join in and help them, and so will Italy and the Hungarians, the Romanians, because it wasn't just obviously the Italians and the Japanese and the Germans. They were the 3 big forces on the Axis, but also the Hungarians, Austrians, Romanians. They all fought on the side of the Nazis as well.
Tell us a little bit about Italy, man, because that was a shocker for me that they were the other Axis.
Yeah,
like
I will do, but just to sort of sum it up, yeah. So that was after Pearl Harbor that really turned the things around. The real massive turning point what started turning the war in the Americans' favour was the Battle of Midway. That was the Battle of Midway, and it was the Battle of Midway was this almost like midway point between Pearl Harbor and the rest of Asia, and it was traditionally used as an American/Allied Air Force base. The Japanese took it, and then essentially the Americans sent these aircraft carriers there, and there were these massive aerial battles across the sky between the Americans and Japanese. And apparently it was an amazing battle because it went back and forth all day. So there were points in the battle where you thought for sure the Japanese were going to win. The next thing you know, for sure the Americans are going to win. The next minute, for sure the Japanese are going to win. In the end, the Americans managed to win, and that was almost seen as the turning point then of the Americans then slowly starting to win the war in the Pacific. Because you've got to bear in mind, at first, after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese couldn't almost like believe their luck. They were like, they were like really concerned about America going into Pearl Harbor. The fact that they managed to like just smoke them literally with no losses, literally like it's not a single loss, and stuff. They like, couldn't believe it. They were like, we are going to destroy these MFers, and they were like, after all these like decades of like disrespect from them and all this, we're just going to smoke them. Slowly that was almost like the turning point, and then, but yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to tell you too much about Italy really, other than the fact that obviously Mussolini was a fascist. He was an actual fascist. Nowadays, everybody says that everybody's a fascist, which cheapens the whole idea of actually what fascism is.
What is fascism?
Should we look at the actual definition of it?
Because, like you say, it is almost a bit of a buzzword.
If you're a fascist, you're very not. You're basically like the opposite of liberal. If a liberal person is basically okay for anybody to be anything as long as you're not hurting anybody, a fascist is. This is the way you should be. If you're not like this, you should be persecuted. Right. But let's look at the official definition. Fascism is a far-right, authoritarian and ultra-nationalistic political ideology characterized by strong centralized government, militarism, and the suppression of opposition. It prioritizes the nation above the individual, often with a dictatorial leader and strong social and economic regimentation. Key characteristics of fascism. The nation is seen as the supreme, national interests are prioritised above all else. Fascist regimes are typically highly centralised and controlled by a single leader or a small group with little to no political opposition allowed. Blah, 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 blah. So yeah, basically Mussolini was a fascist. He rose to power in Italy. I don't really know too much. Again, bit of a gap in my information. I don't really know like how he came into power, Mussolini. I don't know like why he came into power or how he came into power, but obviously he must have been voted into power. And then Italy became a fascist dictatorship. One thing that you got to give to the Greeks, massive respect to the Greeks during World War II. Greece was the only nation other than the UK that refused to surrender to the Axis forces. And I think one thing I have like a real sense of mutual respect with the Greeks, because I think there's something about the Greek people, something about the British people. We're so different in a lot of ways. I mean, you can't get much more different than cottage pie and tzatziki, But, or do you know what I mean? It's like, but I think there's a lot of similarities between Greek people and British people. We're small countries, but we've got these fascinating histories. We've also got this mad histories of like warriors. Like in Greece, obviously Spartans. The Spartans are respected and known the world over, but not just that. They're also known for being the birthplace of like science and diplomacy. The Athenians, were the smartest people in the world 3,000 years ago. All the Hellenistic, temples, and they would have to open discussions about philosophy, and they would have diplomacy where they'd literally vote people in rather than it just being like, no, I'm gonna roll because I'm best or whatever. They had like in-depth chats about astronomy and science and maths and stuff like that. So massive, and similar to the UK. Not only do we have this mad history of warriors with the Anglo-Saxons, the Celts, the Picts, the Vikings, even like some of the Romans that would have ended up settling and then obviously influencing our bloodline a little bit as well. But also, let's face it, we were the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, known really, for being some of the best minds in the world historically. So, but also this like doggedness, the fact that like it was only the Greeks and only the British in Europe that refused to surrender because the Greeks were destroyed. Like, they were really like obliterated by like the Italians and the Germans and stuff in Greece. The Italians and Germans like invaded Greece, and they really like, were like giving it to them. And it would have been easy for them to surrender. But they didn't. They never ever surrendered. They
That's
fought.
Spartan mentality.
Yeah, they just surrendered. They just fought to the end, and I have like so much respect for that.
I've found out about Mussolini and how he became appointed.
Nice man.
So he founded the National Fascist Party,
Right.
Which I think, and I could be wrong here because I'm just trying to essentially paraphrase from the information that I'm seeing. I believe he, similar to Hitler, used the economic problems after World War One.
Right.
Obviously, the Italians being on the Allies in World War One, but still suffered similar economic problems.
I say
afterwards.
so did America. That's what. The knock-on effect of Japan and stuff. I think it happened to a lot of places in the world. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think he sort of used the country's,
economic
situation to his advantage
as a way to garner support.
Exactly. They did a march on Rome in October 1922. Mussolini and his followers, with support from various sectors of society, marched on Rome, aiming to seize power. This act, though not fully violent, put significant pressure on the existing government. So it says there was an existing government. I think it was probably somewhat more of a monarchy as well. I could be wrong there, but probably, it says here that faced with the threat of a coup, King Victor Emmanuel III, rather than risking a violent conflict, appointed Mussolini as prime minister, effectively handing him control of the government.
Man, that king messed up, didn't he?
Yeah, man.
Because not only that, but they brought lots of shame on the country as well.
Definitely.
And his family,
because they
Huh?
And it sounded like the third, so that he would have been in a line of kings.
Oh yeah, yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, Italy, has had a monarchy. I remember one of the interesting facts about Christopher Lee was that he almost married like the princess of Italy. I think that's right. Yeah.
He
or either that, or it was the princess of Sweden, but it was because he was related to Italian royalty. Do you know what I mean? Like that's why he was like deemed good enough. Like good enough.
Because they left the war like relatively early compared to when it finished, right?
Italy. Mussolini was overthrown by the Italian people, and he was killed in the streets.
Right.
Nice.
You can see. There's even pictures of it. I can't remember how they killed him. I think they hung him in the streets. I think they literally lynched him.
Wow.
Killed him in the streets of. I think it was of Rome. And I think they just hung him up and then left his body there for a couple of days.
You were not what you promised.
And then the Italian people were basically then said to the Allies, "Look, we don't want to fight with Hitler. It was Mussolini that wanted to fight with Hitler. Can we join your side now?" And then obviously the Yanks and the Brits and that were like, "Well, yeah, obviously, hell yeah, we've been missing out on our freaking pizza and spaghetti."
Yeah. So I didn't realise they moved over before it was over.
Yeah, but even that's considered a little bit controversial because some people see it a little bit as like when the Italians started realising that the Axis were losing the war, they were like, "We need to switch sides here. Let's overthrow Mussolini." So like some people are like a bit like, "Oh right, yeah, but would they have done that if the Axis were like carrying on winning the war?" Do you know what I mean? Probably not, but either way, I still have lots of love for the Italians. I don't have any love obviously for the fact that they were part of the bloody Axis, but one of my favourite places to go on holiday. And again, very rich culture, obviously, their whole history.
Food.
Yeah, great food, some of the world's best food. One of the best places to go on holiday, in my opinion. And obviously, a bit like the Greeks, such a rich, history, technologically speaking, philosophy, science, surgery, really, really impressive people. And I think Italians, on the whole, also, in general, I like them as people. What you see is what you get, wear their heart on their sleeve, sort of things like that. But I really like the Greeks and the Italians, my kind of people. But yeah, crazy. I think you say Battle of Britain was the first sort of punch in the face of Hitler during the Second World War. Stalingrad, I said, brutal, absolutely brutal. And yet again, could have easily gone the other way.
Tell us all about it, man.
So I'll tell you as much as I can. Obviously, I don't claim to be an expert on Stalingrad, but I know the key facts. So basically, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany had what was called a non-aggression pact. So at the beginning of the Second World War, they signed a non-aggression pact. So Hitler basically said to Stalin, Stalin was a communist dictator. So Stalin was a communist dictator that obviously was in complete control of the Soviet Union. So, I mean, say it's bad, isn't it, as well? Because on the one hand, you had bloody Nazi frickin' Hitler, and then you had communist Stalin. But Stalin didn't give a two Fs about the Allies, about America, about the UK, anything like that. He was like, all he cared about was his communist empire, the Soviet Union. So he didn't care that Hitler invaded Poland. In fact, he was glad that Hitler invaded Poland, because then Stalin spoke to Hitler and he said, not only will I not be bothered about you invading Poland, unlike the UK, who say they're going to go to war with you if you invade Poland, but I'll actually invade Poland from the east if you invade them from the west, and then we'll basically split the spoils. And Hitler was like, fantastic. So so Stalin, yeah, basically, do you know what I mean? Makes his job easier.
Yeah.
So Stalin invaded from the east, Hitler invaded from the west, and they basically met in the middle, carved the country down the middle, and said, right, the Soviet Union can have East Poland and Germany can have West Poland. West Poland will get absorbed into the Nazi Empire, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And they had all those resources and stuff. And then they signed this non-aggression pact. So, and Stalin said basically, look, I don't care what you do in Europe. Look, take over France, take over half of Poland, take over Lithuania, take over whatever you want, Netherlands, etc. Take over the UK if you can, Scandinavia. I don't care. Just don't mess with me. We'll sign this non-aggression pact, but we'll say that we won't be aggressive towards each other militaristically. The problem with Hitler was, unlike Churchill, so Churchill obviously was a man who stood by his word, even though it was very not necessarily good for the British Empire. He went to war with Germany because we said that we would go to war with anybody that invaded Poland, right? So he was a man of his word. Hitler was notoriously not a man of his word. So he didn't care that he'd made this pact with Russia, with Soviet Union, I should say. It was just a matter of time really for Hitler until he invaded the Soviet Union. He hated, one of the very, very few things I'd agree on Hitler with, but Hitler hated communism. He hated the whole idea of communism. He hated communism. It's probably the only thing I actually agree with Hitler on. And he even wrote about that in his manifesto, Mein Kampf. So people obviously that don't know, if anybody doesn't know, when Hitler spent some time in jail before he rose to power, and he wrote a book called Mein Kampf, which means my struggle. And in it, he talks quite openly about how he hates communism. And apparently Stalin had actually read Mein Kampf. So Stalin wasn't stupid. He always had it in the back of his head. I know what Hitler's like. I don't really think he's a man of his word. And he's written openly about how he hates communism. I would not be surprised if at some point he goes back on his word, with this non-aggression pact. Anyway, quite stupidly, and then again, this is a blunder by Hitler, because I think it could have been very easy for the Axis powers to have won the Second World War, but a very convenient series of events happened that allowed us to win. Very stupidly, sometime after the Battle of Britain, Hitler just decided he's going to open up the war on two fronts. So he's already got a war on the Western Front, and he's also already got a war on the Southern Front, because Britain had conquered, during the height of the British Empire, Britain had conquered loads of Africa. So we had all these British forces and stuff in Africa that were also fighting Germany's forces in Africa. So there was already a war on the Southern Front and on the Western Front. Hitler very stupidly, it's like spreading himself too thin, isn't it? This is essentially what he did. Hitler spread himself too thin. He opened up a war on the Eastern Front. He invaded the Soviet Union. And at first he was really successful. So he just used his blitzkrieg tactics, all these amazing tanks, blasted through, took Moscow, which is a very impressive achievement. Took Moscow. In those days it wasn't the capital. I think I'm right in saying that. Can you just double check that he invaded, that he managed to capture Moscow, Bullwinkle? And he had these two. I think he had two massive Nazi divisions, like Nazi, armies in there.
Just off the top of my head, I'm searching it up as I said it. Did Russia not retreat their armies, and that was why he captured it?
Right. I don't think he necessarily did that. There might have been an element of that, but at first Germany were naturally very, very successful. They managed to take a lot of Russia, but what they realised was obviously the Soviet Union was massive. Was freaking huge. I mean, even to this day, Russia's the largest country on the world, isn't it? And the Soviet Union was even bigger by landmass than modern day Russia. And they were like, right, okay, let's not get too ahead of ourselves here. We've got all these massive tanks and stuff. We're going to need a lot of resources to take the whole of the Soviet Union. So where are all their oil fields and stuff? Because we're going to need loads of oil. And they were down to the south of Stalingrad. So like, okay, let's split up our armies. We're going to take half our army down. we're going to capture these oil fields.
They didn't capture Moscow, by the way.
They didn't capture Moscow.
No. I think I was thinking of Napoleon. Not
right. What can you like? What cities the Nazis managed to capture?
They reached the outskirts of Moscow during Operation
Barbarossa. That was just the code name that Hitler gave to the invasion of the Soviet Union.
Right.
So the invasion of Britain he called Operation Sea Lion. The invasion of the Soviet Union called Operation Barbarossa.
What did Hitler capture in Russia?
Yeah, we'll just put in the Soviet Union because that's more accurate. But yeah, so I say apologies for saying that. I thought for some reason he captured Moscow, but obviously didn't. Anyway, he split his army up after he'd conquered a lot of the Soviet Union, and he started going down towards the oil fields. And if he'd done that, yet again, this is one of these weird mistakes that Hitler made. They reckon he would have probably been able to pretty easily capture the oil fields, and then they would have been able to have all these resources and stuff. But instead, he realised that to go down to the oil fields, you'd have to go within quite a close distance to Stalingrad, which was this city. And then suddenly Hitler thought, wait a minute, I really want to take Stalingrad. And one of the reasons he wanted to take it was because it had a big train station there. So it would have been great to get supplies to and from and around the country and stuff. You know, if you can control the trains, then like this, it's cutting off a lot of the supplies to the Soviets. And also now you're in control of them as well. But also, obviously, it was the only place in the Soviet Union that was named after Stalin himself. So we would have seen it as a symbolic victory, almost like a disrespect to Stalin. You know, I'm going to conquer the place that's named after you. And Stalin took this as such a personal attack that he basically said to hit the Soviet army, there is no way in a million years that we are going to let Stalingrad be taken. And this was the first time that Stalin had done it. And up until this point, he didn't really care, to be honest, that Germany had got as far as they had, because let's just be clear, like Stalin didn't care about his people like the same way that, say, Winston Churchill cared about the British people, or Franklin Roosevelt, the president of the USA, cared about his people. He was a crazy communist dictator. He saw the Russian people or the Soviet people as dispensable. But what he did care about was
his ego.
His ego, and obviously he didn't want to lose to the Nazis. So the fact that suddenly Stalingrad, they would try to take Stalingrad, he took this very, very seriously. And what he had done very smartly, up until this point, he employed what's called scorched earth tactics. Do you guys know what that is?
No,
not particularly.
So if you employ scorched earth, it's basically if you're invaded, you destroy any resource you have so that the invading army won't have any resource. So they realised the Germans, say if you lived in a village or a town, you knew that the Blitzkrieg was coming your way, and they're going to be there in 2 hours. You would literally destroy your home, you'd burn your food,
your crops,
you would destroy your crops, you destroy everything, so that when the Germans get to you, the only food they have is their rations, and their rations are going to run out eventually. Russia is a brutal country. It's cold. Winter's coming in.
Yeah, it was coming the winter as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, winter's slowly coming in. The Germans only have so many rations. They did scorched earth policies. So there was, they burned all their buildings, so there wouldn't even be any respite from the cold. They wouldn't have buildings to go into and sleep in during the night. They wouldn't have any food to eat. Nothing like that. Nothing good. So, the Germans still had a lot of rations, but they were heading down towards these oil fields. Then decided they would attack Stalingrad, and Stalin was like, "There's no way we're going to lose." At first, the Germans managed to take massive swaths of Stalingrad. Even so, apparently the Germans were starting to find it quite unnerving, because they said they almost found it like spooky, because it seemed like, to every like one German that was killed, they would kill like 10 Russians. But even so, it just didn't ever seem like the numbers were going down. And this is the thing with the Soviet Union, like, it's massive. And Stalin had like millions and millions and millions of soldiers. And I mean that literally. I don't even know how many in total he would have had, but I know that he threw millions just into Stalingrad, right? So for every only like one German that was killed, they'd kill like 10 Russians. But still, there just didn't ever seem to be like the numbers were going down.
They had 34 million soldiers in the Soviet army.
There you go. I know that like millions were just thrown into the defense of Stalingrad.
That is crazy.
So the Germans were killing loads and loads of Stalingrad. Also, they sent the Luftwaffe over before the soldiers came in, and they bombed the hell out of the city. So the city was already like a nightmare landscape. Just all the buildings were ruined. Hardly anything had like a roof on it. They then sent in the soldiers. There's so many people died. They killed so many Soviet soldiers. But then obviously slowly, even though it was like, for every one German that died, 10 Russians died, or Soviets died, it still started chipping away at the German forces a little bit. And they started to find this, they found it quite disheartening, and it was quite bad for morale that, they were like slowly losing forces, but it just didn't seem like the Russian force was going down. Even so, the German army was so good, they managed to take almost all of Stalingrad. And there were just a couple of little pockets left of Soviet soldiers. But Stalin gave the orders to his generals. He said, like, you will, stay there. I've got a plan. Do not relent. Do not let them take Stalingrad. I've got like a couple of million soldiers on the way. Okay? So Stalin sent a couple of million fresh soldiers. By this point, the winter was creeping in. And apparently this is when it started becoming like a nightmarish landscape for the Germans. And it must have been like hell to these Nazi soldiers, right? Because I think I'm right in saying that in Stalingrad in the winter it can get down to minus something like 25 centigrade, or it might even be minus 30. So I don't even know what that feels like. I don't know about you guys, but I've never been to a place that cold. The coldest I've probably ever experienced in my life is like, I don't know, whatever the coldest winter's ever been in England. I don't know. Or like, it was like, like -8 or something. I don't know, during my lifetime. And there were so many dead soldiers, like literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dead soldiers in Stalingrad, and they were all frozen like that. Apparently with like creepy looks on their faces, and some nights the Nazi soldiers would go to sleep and they wake up in the morning and just their mate that they'd been talking to before bed would just be next to them, like frozen with like this like grimace on their face. Their rations were starting to run out, so all the men were getting really thin. But and apparently by this point the Nazi generals was getting concerned, so he was like telegramming Hitler and saying like, I'm a bit concerned here, we haven't gotten any, like, we've run out of our rations and stuff. Hitler was like, don't worry about it, we'll send the Luftwaffe and we'll drop you some supplies, which they did. But apparently there was like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Nazi soldiers there, and I think it was estimated that they'd need something like 900 tons of food, and the Luftwaffe only managed to successfully give them like something like 35. Right. So even though they did successfully drop them, because a lot of the Soviet Air Force were intercepting and shooting down the planes, obviously. So they did drop the food, but it was like, enough to sort of keep you going, but it would have probably been like a little bit of bread per soldier.
Yeah.
It's like barely scratching an itch. And then so the winter's creeping in, there's just death around them everywhere. The rats are creeping in because of all the death. Everybody's dying. There's just these horrible dead bodies everywhere. Every day morning you wake up, people frozen next to you. And then Stalin sent in these massive forces, and what they did essentially is they just flanked. They flanked Stalingrad. So they surrounded Stalingrad, and then they basically just said to the Nazis, like, look, you're surrounded. You either come out or surrender, or we're all just going to kill you all. And the Nazi general, can't remember his name, sent a telegram to Hitler and said, there's only 300,000 of us by this point. We're surrounded by something like, it was like well over 1 million Soviet soldiers. I can't remember. It might have been like 2 million. It was between like 1 and 2 million. They were like, look,
I've got the numbers.
Right, so what's Stalingrad? So by the point that they were flanked, what was the numbers?
So already it's insane, because you can see just how ridiculous the amount of people were, because there is no way you can get an accurate way to answer this.
Yeah, sure.
Because there's just too many deaths.
Yeah.
The total is probably somewhere between like 1 and 1.5.
What, for the Russians? For the Soviets?
But yes, well, either.
Right,
So
okay.
it's essentially saying here, Soviet casualties could have been about 1.1 million.
So that's how many died?
Yeah.
Just in the Battle of Stalingrad?
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? This is just one battle in World War II.
Axis casualties could be about somewhere between 500,000 to 800,000.
Yeah.
But to be honest, there could be less, there could be more. It could be like 1 million, it could be 1.5 million total,
Yeah.
It could be 2 million total.
Yeah. So I know that
Crazy.
by the point that they were flanked, for some reason I just remember this. I remember that there were 300,000 Nazis left, but they were surrounded by that point by I think at least 1 million fresh Soviet soldiers. So they sent a telegram to Hitler and they said, look, we're surrounded. We've essentially lost. I don't really know what to do. We can either try and puncture a hole in the flank and just basically try and bomb it back to Germany, and just, we're going to take casualties, but hopefully a lot of our soldiers will escape alive. Or we can surrender, but then, the Soviets have a history of being brutal to their, to the people they capture. What do you want us to do? And Hitler, in a very cold, sociopathic way, basically said, I will not accept anything other than victory. You're going to stay there until you win. So the general obviously was like, yeah, but it's impossible, we're going to win. So what do you want us to do? It's impossible that we're going to win. We're like run out of food. We're dying. And Hitler was just like, victory or death. That's it. So that's basically what he said to him. Victory or death. So then he's essentially saying death, because there's no way they can win at that point. But because, you know, the Germans were stubborn, the Nazis were stubborn, you've got to bear in mind up until this point as well, apart from the Battle of Britain, which was an aerial battle, the actual German army at that point hadn't suffered a defeat. The actual German army and all the panzer divisions, they hadn't suffered a defeat up until this point.
That's crazy.
The Luftwaffe had lost the Battle of Britain against us, but that was the Air Force. That's different. The actual German army, they hadn't suffered a defeat, so they were very proud. They didn't want to concede victory. And it was hellish, just every day. You know, you can see there's video footage of it, which I think is crazy in itself, because I think it's mad that even in those days there would have been like people taking the time to video this. You can watch videos of the last days of Stalingrad from the Germans' footage, and the people are like, their like faces are sunken in because they're so like gaunt and skeletal, almost like from the lack of food, and they're like, you know, there's just dead bodies everywhere, which must have been so traumatic for the people, just like the sheer negativity and all these broken, destroyed buildings, just dead bodies everywhere, just frozen in place, like. But because basically Hitler didn't let them, like, you know, have an escape plan. He didn't try and send a relief army as well. He basically said, look, we don't have enough soldiers to send you a relief army, you know, to try and help you recapture Stalingrad, so you're basically on your own. Which must have been brutal to hear that as like a German there. You know, you've been promised all this stuff by Hitler, and that you're going to, you know, have this new amazing Reich that's going to take over the world, and everything's going to be good if you're German. So eventually, after like loads more casualties and like thousands and thousands of more deaths, even though Hitler told him not to, the Nazi general surrendered. And I think by that point, I think there was 50,000 Germans left. They finally surrendered. I think it was 50. Might have been more. Well, can you look at how many German Nazi soldiers there were when they caught Stalingrad? But one thing I do remember, and this is a brutal statistic. So they surrendered to the Soviets. The Nazis didn't know, and the West didn't know, what happened to those soldiers after that. But what we do know is only 5,000 after the war made it back to Germany.
91,000.
So 91,000 were captured. Only 5,000 of those Nazi soldiers made it back to Germany after the end of the war. So what happened to the rest of them? You know, what happened to the other 86,000? They were all tortured and killed, and awful stuff. Yeah, so brutal. So Battle of Stalingrad. So I can't remember how many people died in total during the Battle of Stalingrad.
About 1.5 million, probably somewhere.
1.5 million died just in the Battle of Stalingrad. Just in the Battle of Stalingrad. Yeah.
That film, Enemy at the Gates, is about Stalingrad. I remember. I love that one. Yeah, it's like set in the city of like Stalingrad and stuff.
Wow.
Just on one that's cool.
Yeah. 100%, man. Yeah. So that's considered like a major turning point again in the war. You know, that's a major turning point. That's almost like, that was like, if you want, that was the first part where it was sort of the beginning of the end for Hitler. But I say there's so many interesting parts about, you know, we won't have enough time to talk about it today, but I said you've got to bear in mind that while all this is going on, we've talked, you know, we've touched on Pearl Harbor, we've touched on the Battle of Britain, we've touched on Stalingrad. While this is going on, as I said, there was all these battles going out in Africa, which is crazy. All in Egypt and stuff like that, you know, all between like German forces and British forces, so all playing out in the desert, which is crazy. And as you said, you've got the whole Holocaust element to it as well. In total, over 50 million people died during World War II. 50 million.
It's crazy.
Millions of civilians were killed in bombings, raids, and famines. This is another thing which really shot the Nazis in the foot. Because Hitler basically had convinced the German people that the Slavic people, essentially Soviet people, or, you know, Slavs are like Poles, Russians, Lithuanians, that people of Slavic descent, the same way we're of like Germanic, Celtish, Pictish descent. They are of Slavic descent. He convinced them that basically that they were like subpar, and they weren't deserving of the same respect that you would give to like a Germanic person. So you wouldn't treat them with the same decency. So when the Nazis invaded Russia, they raped loads of the women. They killed women and children. And didn't care. And one thing you don't want to do is anger the Soviets and do things like that to the Soviets, because then what happened at the end of the war, after D-Day, so D-Day obviously is when the Allied forces on the west invaded Normandy. So my great uncle Bill, who's now just passed away a couple of years ago, he was there, a British Marine. He was there. So the Americans, the British, the Canadians, the Australians, the New Zealanders invaded Normandy. It's called D-Day, D-Day landings. Successfully took eventually France, and then started marching, basically slowly regaining parts of Europe until they finally got to Berlin. About the same time as well, the Soviet army was moving in, and around the same time, the Soviets got there a little bit quicker. They basically met at Berlin, and that's obviously famously you'd have East Berlin, West Berlin, right up until, what was it, I think about 1990, maybe late 80s, I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, what was quite brutal is because of the way that the Nazis had treated the Russian people when the Nazis invaded Russia, the Russians basically decided that they were just going to do exactly the same, if not worse, to the Germans. So when the Soviet armies invaded Germany, eventually, they were exactly the same. So they raped all the German women. They would like shave their heads, rape them, torture them, kill the kids, everything. It was brutal. There are tales of how there would be people on the east side of Berlin that knew that the Red Army was coming. That's the name of the Soviet army, the Red Army was coming, and they knew that the Allied army was coming from the west, the British and the Americans and that, and then they would literally run towards the west because they knew that there was, you were basically, by that point it was, who are you going to surrender to? You're going to surrender to the Soviets, you're going to surrender to the Brits and the Yanks. And they knew that if they surrendered to the Brits and the Yanks, they would essentially get treated okay. You know, they'd have to live a life of shame, and they'd be like in prison for a while and all the rest of it until their new governments were sorted out and all the rest of it. But, you know, you're not going to be like raped or tortured or anything. So they would like run towards the Americans and the British and just hope that they could surrender to them first, because they knew that if the Soviets got to them, it would be like torture, rape, death. Yeah, brutal. Absolutely brutal.
Crazy.
Absolutely brutal.
It's crazy, like, in terms of like Winston Churchill, for example, how he was able to, like, not convince, but what's the word I'm looking for?
Garner support of the public?
Yes, because obviously World War One was not that long before.
No.
You know, they would have all known people, and a lot
Yeah.
of them that would have fought would have probably fought in World War One too.
Oh, 100%.
And even that, World War One had 40 million deaths.
Winston Churchill himself fought in World War One. Yeah.
So you would think,
I
like,
think.
obviously Germany had the privilege, I suppose, that they were so angry because of the Treaty of Versailles and the way they've been treated after the war, that they already had that anger built within the country, that everyone wanted to go to war, because realistically they couldn't have been in a worse position afterwards. You know, whereas in England and the UK, I suppose we would have done quite well after World War One. I'm not too sure what our economic state would have been.
I mean, I don't really know. Like, it'd be quite interesting to look at it more of like an in-depth economic evaluation of what it was like post World War One. I know that around that time it was considered around. I don't know how much of this was to do with World War One. It was a bit like the death of the gentry. You know, so
Right.
you think of like Downton Abbey and how everyone, there'd have been like these lords and ladies, and a lot of them had servants. It was around that in between the World War One and World War Two. A lot of these families ended up selling their palaces and their places to National Trust, the National Trust and the English Heritage and things like that, because they could no longer afford the upkeep and the maintenance of having a place like that. Because you've got to play it in mind, these sorts of places, it's like hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of maintenance a year, and that's so much. Even if you're ridiculously rich, they just couldn't keep maintain the upkeep, let alone have all the servants to serve them every day and everything. So they a lot of these they downgraded. That's why, obviously, apart from the very, very top levels of royalty, there aren't really that many lords and ladies around anymore. You know, you see, like, as I said, Downton Abbey is a perfect example. There used to be a sort of a place in society that was almost like between the top levels of royalty and between what you would include, I guess, like upper class, and it would always be this lord ladyship. That was almost the death of that. You know?
So even like apart from that, I guess then, but just because of how brutal World War One was, and like you were saying earlier, the trench warfare and everything, you'd imagine the population, the last thing that they would have possibly wanted would be to go into war again.
I guess once Germany, there probably would have been an element of that until Germany started blitzing.
Yeah.
And by that point, regardless of whether you like it or not, you're being bombed.
Yeah, true.
And by that point, you just have to stick together as a people and do everything you can to defend your homeland.
True.
And I guess as well,
I just think it's incredible that he was able to keep that mentality so strong within the country and keep everyone so united.
I think it's probably, you know, it's similar to, like, you know, what made Alex Ferguson a great football coach for Man United. Do you know what I mean? It's the ability to inspire your people, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, that they want to go and fight for you, you know, and it's not everyone can do that, but he just had that thing. That's why his speeches are considered so legendary. You know, this like, we will fight them on the beaches, We shall fight them on the landing grounds. You know, it's like, we shall never surrender. And you listen to that and you're like, hell yeah, we won't. you know, and you can tell he believes it.
Yeah.
Which makes you believe it, you know? And then obviously, so the Germans finally gave it. I think they surrendered in May of 1945. That's just off the top of my head. Can you fact check that for me?
On it, man.
I think the Germans ended up surrendering in May of 1945, essentially because we bombed the crap and Berlin and just taken it. We'd just taken Germany, you know, and basically that was the end of Nazi Germany.
May 7th.
May 7th, May 7th, 1945. The most likely thing is that Hitler committed suicide in a bunker underground in Berlin with his wife Eva Braun.
Today.
Took a cyanide. Is it?
Today. May 7th, today.
Oh, mental.
Which makes sense, because then May 8th is when everyone celebrated it, which is tomorrow, which at the time of recording is VE Day.
Wow, mental. There you go, mate. There you go. Eva Braun and Hitler took a cyanide pill in a bunker underneath Germany. There are some people that think that Hitler escaped through a secret network, made his way to a submarine in Spain, and travelled underground or under the sea in the Atlantic via submarine to Argentina.
I've heard that, yeah.
And lived out the rest of his days in Argentina. There are some people, and I'm not talking like, tinfoil heads. I'm talking like military personnel. There are like military personnel, like, high up military personnel that believe this. I don't really know. I think it's probably most likely that he killed himself in the bunker under Germany, but who knows, man? There definitely is a fact though that several Nazi officers did escape to Argentina, and apparently it's mental because you can go to Argentina nowadays. Now you can go to like weird little towns in the middle of frickin' nowhere in Argentina, and they all speak German. They all speak German, and they all like talk about how they've got like pictures of their grandfathers and stuff that are like wearing like Nazi uniforms and stuff. And it's like mental. Isn't that crazy?
It is insane.
And then I think the war officially ended. I can't remember if it was August or September, and that was with Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah.
So the atomic bombs dropping. So Japan lasted longer than Germany. They were basically like, no, we are not going to surrender. We are not going to surrender. USA, son. We will fight till the end. Oh. We do not care. And then America were like, right, we've got these freaking bombs, and they are way bigger than any bombs I've ever been made before. We're going to drop them on you if they don't surrender. They were like, no. So, first bomb that was dropped was Hiroshima. Dropped out of a plane called the Enola Gay. That was the name of the bomber that flew over Hiroshima. First ever atomic bomb in history. Killed, obviously, a ridiculous amount of people in one hit. The Japanese still didn't surrender. So after that, they dropped another atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Didn't kill as many people as Hiroshima, but still killed a ridiculous amount of people. After that, the Japanese could do nothing but surrender, because otherwise they were just going to destroy all of Japan. And that was the end of World War II, ladies and gentlemen.
Do you know, I've been to Hitler's bunker in Berlin.
What?
When I went to...
I didn't even know you could. I didn't even know that was a thing, mate.
Yeah, it's crazy going over that. I went on like a walking tour when I went to Berlin. And like even just seeing the whole of East Berlin and West Berlin, the difference between it is mental, because it's so hopeless on the east side. But on this walking tour, it ends. They take you to like this little area, which is where Hitler's bunker was.
Right.
It's just like a car park.
That's mental.
Yeah. It's that there's no like signing that's what that is. Like it's just completely covered. Like you wouldn't, if someone didn't point it out to you, you just wouldn't know at all. Yeah. Which is insane.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I think there's a bit of an element of that in Germany, isn't it? Though they're obviously like so ashamed of it, and it's almost like so recent still that they almost like try and pretend as best they can that it didn't happen. Not like in a way that they deny it, but in a way that obviously in their day-to-day lives they don't want to be thinking about it. They don't. You know what I mean? They don't want to be like thinking about it. They don't want to be talking about it. You know, like. So it's almost like
must be such a hard thing to deal with, like those years after and that. Like I always think that, you know, because of how many and films about and everything like that. Everyone knows how savage and horrific it was for that to be a thing that happened, and for so many people to get on board with it as well. You
can watch videos, can't you? And it's obviously because as the Allies started taking Germany, obviously they would start taking parts of Germany that had the concentration camps. So they'd go and liberate the camps, and they just couldn't believe it. They got there and like it was just the death and the destruction, and all the bodies and the people that were still alive were just so gaunt and just absolutely mad. They said it was like pure evil. Apparently, some of the officers, and we're talking like army men who were like had killed people. We're not talking about like people that faint when they see a bit of blood. They were like throwing up and stuff because they could not believe that like, a human being could do this to another human being.
It's insane.
It's actually crazy. Yeah, I mean, what some of Rush's songs, the band Rush, are about concentration camps because Geddy Lee, who was the lead singer, he is a Jew. He comes from Polish Jewish ancestry, and his family were pretty much all of them were taken to concentration camps. I think they were taken to Bergen-Belsen, I think, and he was just too young. He would have wasn't born yet, but his mum and dad basically told him how it was like it was like crazy. Yeah, they'd like line up every day, and said that, like the heartbreak of like apparently one day where their grandmother was like sent to the concentration camp, but then they were sent to like the labor camp. So they knew that was the last time they were ever going to see their grandmother. But like, what can you do in that situation? Do you know what I mean, there was nothing they could do. But it's like that hard like sinking in. It's like crazy.
Just not even like comprehensible, is it?
No,
at all.
I think it's called Red Sector A. There's a Rush song about it. It's a bloody good song, man. Are we the last ones left alive? Are we the only human beings to survive? It's well good.
Nice.
Well good song. Check it out, everyone. Check it out. Red Sector A, Rush. But I think we're going to have to wrap it up, folks. Been going for over 2 hours, but I thought...
Happy VE Day.
Yeah, happy VE Day. V for victory.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, massive respect to anybody,
I think that was one of the most informative episodes we've ever done for me, who doesn't know much about it, only tidbits. It's really interesting.
I think World War II is fascinating. I think there's always more to know as well. Like, there's loads of like things about World War II I don't really know about. Like, I don't really know much about the whole African like theatre of war. I know that Field Marshal... can't even remember his name now. Basically, the top Field Marshal of the British Army. He served there before he then came to Normandy for the D-Day landings and stuff like that. But can't believe I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He's like a legendary British officer. But anyway, I don't really know much about the whole African theatre. It's sort of like a bit of like a blip in my knowledge.
I love this game called, I think it was called Battlefield.
Was it like the old one? Back in the day?
It's I got it on the Xbox and...
Oh, would you play it now?
Yeah, and
Battlefield
cool.
1.
Yeah, either Battlefield 1 or Battlefield 2, I can't remember, but basically in it, it's all of those different areas of World War II. So one of them you're in a plane, one of them you're in like Africa,
nice.
and you can kind of travel around the map, and it's like in each one you're a different hero of that area, and you do these missions and stuff, and there's about 5 or 6 levels within each section, if you know what I mean, or just little, and you can complete the game quite quickly in that. But it was epic, going all around the world basically in these different situations of it, and it was set in World War II.
So cool, man. That sounds like. Oh, do you know what? That's making me want to play that.
Yeah, I'll look it up and I'll send it to you, man, because it's a real fun game.
Yeah, see which one you've got.
Even the very first scene is like I'm pretty sure it must have been D-Day. Like it was mental, just like brutal, and the amount of death that's happening, like to get that across in the game, you just keep dying. Like you just and then you all of a sudden, wherever you die in that point in the game, like you just go to the next person that's next to you, and then you start playing as
that's
them.
So mad.
It's really cool.
I like how they do it like that rather than you respawning.
Yeah,
it makes you
and you complete the level but by just dying at the end, like, or something. I'm pretty sure. Like, it's just like it was just showing how kind of the amount of death that happened in that one battle.
Yeah, my great uncle Bill, he fought at D-Day. He passed away 2023. Went to his funeral up in York, and he didn't really like to talk about the war. Because I think he just, I think he never obviously said it, and it wasn't really diagnosed, because obviously it's like old school British person, it's like stiff upper lip, isn't it? There's no such thing, like in those days you wouldn't diagnose somebody with PTSD. It just wasn't really something.
No, they'd be shell shocked. I think he did and that was a known thing, but that was people would get like full on like the jitters and stuff.
But I think he did sort of have PTSD about it a bit, and that's why I didn't really talk about it. But I know he did say, not to me, but he said to some other close family members of his that have then told me that he said that like the D-Day landings were like freaking mental, because he said, it's like every minute is surreal. Like you never really truly accept that it's reality, because he said, like, you'd wake up in the morning, you know what your objective is. I think he landed on Juno Beach. Anyway, he said, you're on the landing craft, so you'd be on your ships, and then you'd be like setting off on these landing crafts, and they were almost looked a bit like skips, I guess, but skips full of soldiers that'd be like go towards
Saving Private
shore.
Ryan is a really good depiction of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he said, back in those days, everyone smoked. So, he said that you'd be on like your landing craft, and you'd be like laughing and joking with the guys, because, British are obviously known for their good sense of humour, aren't they? Even in the face of death. So, you'd be like laughing and joking, like you take be offered a cigarette from his mate, who he was like, would play cards with every day, and was like playing cards with the night before and stuff. So like smoking a cigarette with him, and like, well, this is it, old boy, this is it. Then like, yeah. And he said, like, the first thing that happened, the landing thing, like, massive bomb went off near his, he was like about 12 foot away from this mate who was just chatting with on the landing craft, like having a cigarette with. But his mate was close enough to the bomb that went off that he literally just got like blown to pieces. And then he just remembers, as he was running, there's like bits of his mate's flesh was like raining down on him, like bits of like skin and blood and just body parts were like raining down on him as he was like running, and then like having to like crawl under the barbed wire and that. And then when he was cremated, my dad's cousins, who would have been Bill's sons and daughter, Bill's children, were given like, I can't remember how many pounds it was now. It was something like 4 pounds of shrapnel that were given to him in a bag, because obviously when you're cremated, it burns all the bone and the metal and the flesh, but any like metal, it's not hot enough to melt the metal. So they obviously they took the metal out of the ash, gave him like the urn of Bill's ash, and then they gave him in a bag, like this little bag of shrapnel, and it had been shrapnel that he'd been carrying around with him ever since the Second World War, and it was all just like bits of shrapnel from bombs and like fragments of bullets and stuff like that, because it's like no one really left something like that unscathed.
That's insane.
So, I mean, it was just like, are you okay enough basically not to die? And are you lucky enough that, like, rather than something going in your eye and then through to your brain, is it going to hopefully go into like your tit or your arm? Do you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, mental, absolutely mental. Right, yeah, we have to wrap up, everyone. Happy VE Day.
Good stuff.
Respect to anyone that fought, lived or died in the war, in all areas. And let's all use, history as something to learn from, as like a British person. Yeah, just, I'll say as well, thank you to all of our allies out there, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States of America. I love you, even though I was honest in my assessment of Pearl Harbor. I love you. I love you.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, cheers everyone that listens to Pandora's Box every week. Please remember to go and give us a like and a subscribe and a follow on all of our various platforms, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, all that thing. And we shall see you next time. Laters, folks.
Ta-ta.